Hey everybody, what's today? Today is Thursday. Happy Thursday and welcome to another TechStrong TV broadcast. Today is Thursday, April 22nd. It is Earth Day, so I hope everybody goes out and does something nice for Mother Earth today. Take a walk, ride your bike instead of driving, do something, pick up a bag full of garbage or something for Mother Earth. But it's a great day outside, and it's a great day indoor too, and we have a great broadcast for you today. We are going to start things off with a conversation between Alan and Anand Babu Pariyasamy, who is the co-founder and CEO of Min.io. They are one of the most widely used substitutes for S3 across public and private clouds. So Alan and Anand talk about what Min.io is all about and why it's so popular and what is actually driving the popularity. Really interesting discussion. After that, Alan speaks with Nithya Ruff, who is the head of the Open Source Program Office at Comcast. Comcast has been a huge supporter of open source initiatives, and they've been doing some really, really fascinating things in the open source community. So Alan and Nithya talk about some of the more recent open source projects that are now in sandbox status over at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, the ones that Comcast has actually developed and contributed to the CNCF. So it's a really, really fascinating conversation. After that, Alan speaks with Bill Mann, who is the CEO of Styra. Styra is the founder of OPA and Styra DAS, and they are definitely making huge progress with those technologies. So Bill and Alan talk about what's going on and why the cloud native world is rallying around the OPA standard. Great conversation. After that, Alan has yet another interview. This one is with Evelyn Orlick, who is the Chief Research Officer over at DevOps Institute. They talk about the Upskilling 2021 Enterprise DevOps Skills Report. This is a research project that was done by the DevOps Institute, and Evelyn and Alan discuss the results, discuss the report itself, and what it means for the DevOps community at large. It is a fascinating conversation. Evelyn, she's a research guru. She knows her stuff, and so definitely it's a conversation you want to check out. After that, we have the next in our regular installment of the CISO Talk series. This one is focused on women in technology, and it features Karen Moore, who is the Chief Compliance and Privacy Officer at Unisys, and Michelle Beastie, who is the Chief Ethics, Compliance, and Privacy Officer at the Nature Conservancy. They speak with Alan, Mitch, and Matt Newfield of Unisys. They talk about the value of gender diversity and how to attract and develop top talent, as well as how to create opportunities for growth and development among the female community in IT. It is a fascinating conversation. It's obviously one that's very important to me, as you know, I'm all about gender diversity. And we talk about, they talk about how the goal really should be to achieve people in tech rather than a male versus female, and really eliminating that from the equation altogether. We really want to be, we really want to appreciate everybody's differences, but we should all be treated equally. So there's my soapbox right there. After that, I come on and I've got the news headlines for you, as always, and then I have a conversation with effort via social media to raise awareness about diversity and equality in the developer community, specifically the cybersecurity community. And this organization is fairly new, fairly nascent, but she's gotten a lot of traction with it so far. And she and I talk about what BGH is doing. It's hashtag BGH, and how it is really furthering the conversation about diversity and inclusivity in cybersecurity and in IT. Tanisha is a spark plug, and she has got a lot of great ideas. So I highly recommend that you listen to this conversation because it is a fun one. After that, I have a conversation with Kai Rohrer, who's the managing director of KnowBe4 Research. We talk about some of the findings from the 2021 Security Culture Report that KnowBe4 recently put out. And it focuses on how organizations and employees think about and approach some of the key elements to security. Some really eye-opening statistics and results that are in this research report, and definitely one if your organization has any issues regarding cybersecurity, and really what organization doesn't. This is definitely a conversation you want to check out. After that, we have Mitch Ashley comes on, and he's got a video, speaks with Blair Lyon, who is the VP of Cloud Experience at Linode. They talk about some of the recent research that was commissioned by Linode, and it looks at alternative cloud infrastructure providers and their increasing role as alternatives or additive options to some of the larger cloud providers such as AWS, Google, and Azure. Accelerated Strategies Group did the report. As I said, it was commissioned by Linode, and Blair and Mitch talk about some of the results of the report and how these alternative cloud services providers really can be a value add to organizations, regardless of whether they exclusively use alternative cloud services providers or they use them as a complementary to some of the larger guys. So it's a really, really interesting conversation. After that, I think we have our view with Vizard, with Mike Vizard. He speaks with Deep Instinct CEO Guy Caspi. They talk about how deep learning algorithms are transforming cybersecurity. The company just recently picked up $100 million in funding, which is almost, that's a healthy amount for sure. And there's been so much money poured into the cybersecurity sector over the last 12 months, then the tap does not seem to be shutting off anytime soon. So, and that's actually something I talk about in the news headlines. We actually have an article about that. But Deep Instinct is doing some really interesting things regarding artificial intelligence and deep learning algorithms in the cybersecurity space. So definitely you want to check that one out. All right, we have just a loaded TechStrong TV broadcast, and we're going to get the fun rolling right after these commercial messages. All right, welcome back, everybody. First up, we have a conversation between Alan and Anand Babu Periaswamy, who is the co-founder and CEO of Min.io. Min.io is one of the most widely used substitutes for S3 across all public and private clouds. Alan and Anand talk about this popular program and what's driving it. It's a great conversation. Let's get right to it.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on another segment for TechStrong TV. My guest this segment is a first-time guest on TechStrong. His name is A.B. Periaswamy. He is the founder and CEO of a company called, and if I hope I get this right, Min.io. Is that correct, A.B.?
That is right, Alan.
All right. And just look, in case you have family and relatives watching, AB, of course, is short. Your full name is Anand Babu Periaswamy.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, I go by many names, but this works.
Okay. I'm going to call you AB if it's okay. So, AB, as I mentioned, we are it's a case of first impression. We've not heard anything about the company or yourself before. Let's share with our audience, if you don't mind, giving us some background on you, the company's recent news. Take it away.
Great. Yeah, my background, I have been in the distributed computing and storage space as long as I can remember. It's open source, distributed systems, startups, and some angel investment. And this particular startup, it was not my idea. I didn't want to do another startup. It's my co-founders to blame.
Okay, so you're blaming them, but go ahead.
Yeah, and Minayo, it's actually an object storage startup. Object storage, what it is exactly like Amazon S3 or Google Cloud Storage or Azure Blob Store. Do you get that only within the cloud? And if you go between the clouds, they are incompatible with each other. And everyone is struggling with the data growth problem. And Minayo is basically an Amazon S3 alternative. And our goal was that when we started, that world is producing so much data, and its bulk of the data is produced outside of these public clouds, and they are not going to store that on SAN or NAS or HDFS. They're going to need something that looks exactly like Amazon S3. And our point was, if Amazon can do 1,000 things, right, then they're a collection of startups, right? For us to do one thing better than Amazon, can we not build something better than Amazon S3? Certainly, yes, right? That's how Minayo was born. And Minayo is basically to give everyone Amazon S3 replacement, but a better one.
Excellent. And how long have you been working on this?
We started in 2015. In fact, my background, my previous startup is a distributed file systems. And it's a file system called Gluster FS. Now it's part of IBM to the Red Hat acquisition.
I remember covering it back in my network world days, actually.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah. A while ago.
Yeah, it is a while ago. And I learned good ideas doing Gluster, but what not to do specifically. But I didn't do this as a continuation of Gluster, and I didn't want to do another startup or a storage startup, right? But I just saw that world is producing so much data, and 10 years from now, I know that one problem will compound and grow, that is data growth. And if I built a powerful brand in this space, I can't go wrong. And that's basically where that object storage idea came into life.
So let's talk about this a little bit, right? So Amazon S3 is pretty much a de facto standard, right? Very popular. As you mentioned, while all three of the major public cloud providers offer similar type of object storage, there's slight differences between them. Mm-hmm. So is Minayo meant to be sort of an abstract that allows you to glide, if you will, between the different platforms, as well as an on-premises, maybe private cloud or whatever you want to call it, platform, so to kind of equalize your object storage across? Or is it just meant to just flat out replace S3 and without having Amazon?
Yeah, it is actually a complete flat out replacement, because sitting on top of something, like if you look at just GCS, Google Cloud Storage, or Azure Blob or Amazon S3, they are incompatible with each other, whether it's a API itself from access point of view or some policies and key management, every way they're incompatible. It only takes one API to break, and you're stuck with one provider. Even if they are exactly API compatible, the performance SLAs, like if you're building a Snowflake-like product, right? And if the performance SLAs are not met, you can't really move around. And what customers were looking for was, now they call it hybrid cloud, but it came as an afterthought. What really happened was they basically put Minayo just like they would put Elasticsearch or Kafka or any other database as part of their application stack. They brought Minayo into their stack, and they rolled out their entire stack on public cloud or private cloud. For them, they look at public cloud as just cheap CPU, network, and drive on demand that they can provision through the kubectl YAML file. And with this approach, they see the advantage of they are in control of the data and the technology stack, but more than the control, they actually want to modernize their entire infrastructure through just containers, and they roll it out. With the MinIO being a complete replacement of Amazon S3, they can now roll their entire, not only data infrastructure, the application and their entire software stack can be rolled out in minutes on the public cloud, on any public cloud or private or even the edge. If they leave that to, say, Amazon S3, now you roll out your service on some other infrastructure, it just doesn't work. So it needs to be a complete replacement.
Got it. And this goes to kind of the heart of, when you looked at, and you've been around as I have, right? When we first saw AWS infrastructure as code, that really was the heart of it, right? It was computing power, memory, storage, but it wasn't, right? That was the difference between infrastructure code and then platform. Mm-hmm. As not infrastructure as code, excuse me, infrastructure as a service, and then platform as a service, right? Was that it added more to that basic. But of course, what we saw was that when you started moving up that stack, so to speak, to platform, it also locked you in, right? Because you got away from that just platform.
Yeah. Actually, this is this particular point, industry did not see it for a while, because Amazon started out, the whole cloud business started with AWS S3. Then came EC2, then came EBS and everything else. And slowly the database, everything started appearing along the side. It made a lot of sense, but it succeeded as infrastructure as a service. Infrastructure as a service is no-brainer. It is here to stay, because the applications team, product team, they are tired of IT taking months to provision infrastructure. By the time they take the project live on AWS or one of these public cloud, it makes all the sense, right? But what they don't want is actually PaaS. The PaaS looks great on paper. It makes every sense that I should be focused on my business logic and my application. Let everything, all the building blocks of my platform, it's someone else's problem, right? Database or message queue or a language framework. Let someone else manage it for me. It all means productivity. But for many reasons, PaaS never took off. And if you see all the infrastructure players, they started out as infrastructure, and then they want to innovate and lock you in, and they want to become PaaS. And I'm consistently seeing that from the customer's point of view, they are like, I want CPU, network, and drive as a Kubernetes API, and I can roll out my infrastructure on any of these clouds. Hybrid cloud look like an anti-pattern. Like if you are not all AWS, it look like you're out of trend, but that trend is now beginning to reverse. And I also thought that public cloud will succeed, and then private cloud will slowly emerge. In the long run, the lines will blur. But the industry is kind of changing in a way that public cloud succeeded, and then before private cloud gained acceptance, hybrid cloud is the trend that's happening now, because customers learned how to do it correctly in the public cloud. Now they're saying, I want the same thing on private cloud, but I'm not going to cut off my public cloud. I like public cloud. I want to keep using and growing my public cloud, while my private cloud becomes exactly compatible with public cloud. Whether private cloud grows or not, the private cloud itself could be growing on Equinix, one of these colo providers, or it could be multi-cloud. I think the lines are beginning to blur, but infrastructure as a service is what customers are looking for, not platform as a service.
Correct. So, and it is, you mentioned the multi-cloud thing. I think in my mind, that was something a lot of people missed. I think people recognized that the world would go hybrid. There'd be public and private. And the question is, what was the mix, right? How much was going to be on public cloud? Because for all the talk about public cloud, really, I mean, if 20% of critical infrastructure is on public cloud today, it's a lot. Most of it is still on private. The move to a hybrid, the move to multi-cloud, where people pick and choose, you know what, for this kind of thing, I'm going to use Microsoft. And for this kind of thing, I'll use Amazon. And for that kind of thing, I'll use Google. And that's okay, right? Because I don't want to put everything on one, because they each have different strengths, right? And then And then mixing that with the private cloud makes for a rather complex, deployment scenario, right? Now you're dealing with, 2, 3, 4 different stacks, if you will.
Yeah.
And in my mind, the computing industry is always searching for, the promise of Java. Write it once, run it everywhere, right?
Yeah.
We're still looking for that same kind of thing. Right, I want to do it once, and it should run on every cloud.
Yeah.
And whether it's private, public, Google, Amazon, what have you, and I don't know if that's a fool's errand or not, if we'll ever actually realize that or not. But that's certainly, it's like this idyllic mission that we seem to be on.
Yeah. So when we started, right, the Docker was white hot. And
yes,
right before that, there was Mesos around the same time. Hadoop was seen as data operating system. They actually called it so, right? And then Cloud Foundry on one side, it was growing. We always knew compute every 3 to 5 years, new ideas come up, and over 10, I can tell probably in 10 years, Kubernetes won't be this hard. But in every step, one thing is becoming clear, that every iteration, we get simpler and better. We are able to do more with less effort. I think I see that as a progress, right? On the data side, still there are many in denial that POSIX and SAN and NAS, HCI, hyperconverged storage is the norm. I think they're beginning to wake up to the reality that cloud has set the new standard. Object storage is replacing them. Storage evolves much slowly compared to computing. On the computing side today, what has happened is with like the language part, like forcing everybody to Java, it had wild success, but not successful enough. And what has actually happened was with the containerization, it doesn't matter you're running on what operating system underneath. Even VMs prove to be very expensive, right? With the containers, your application dependencies are packaged just into the application binary, and you can roll out and version them. That has actually freed up the dependencies on these portability problems, and it has made them very productive. We actually saw this firsthand, that I was like, MinIO itself is just a 50, actually back then it was 25 megabyte static binary. Why would you put this in a 100 MB, 200 MB container? Just run it on any of these machines. It makes no sense to actually put that on a container. Application containers float around easily, I get it. But then what I found was the applications team was like, once I containerize, I want to containerize everything, not because I like containers, it's because I can roll out through my CI/CD infrastructure the same way I roll out my application code, storage, database, everything is now part of my containerized infrastructure. That is where many experimentations happened, and eventually industry consolidated around Kubernetes. Now with the Kubernetes, what they look at, the way they look at the public cloud, they no longer look at as EC2 API, like AWS CLI, Google as G-Cloud tool. Everybody has their proprietary tools and proprietary APIs. Actually, customers are saying, all I want is I've declared what I want in my YAML file. Every one of these public cloud or private cloud standardized on Kubernetes, and they support containers. Then for me, CPU means my Kubernetes milli CPU. I just say this much memory I want. So the portability has largely been achieved by putting, whether you're Rust code or Java or PHP, they all run fine in a container, roll it out and multiple times a day. We have gotten pretty close. I wouldn't say this is the end of it, right? But compared to where we were, this is a huge progress.
Absolutely. Absolutely. AB, I could talk to you all day about this, but we really were supposed to talk about some new news out of the company, and it's time we get to that.
Great. Yes. And
go ahead.
Yeah, so we started in 2015, right? We knew that this is something that if you do it at a small scale, you get crushed. It's not about startup versus big company. Object storage, it is a critical foundational piece of your infrastructure. The only way you get to survive is you become a leading player in your category. And for us, the positioning was very clear. AWS S3 can only win AWS. But what about the rest of the world? And that is where we can build an object storage that can win the rest of the world. And today it has grown to a stage where even within AWS, we have more than 3 million unique IPs running MinIO. It has just grown everywhere. we have like 700,000 Docker pulls a day. And we clearly now lead the hybrid cloud object storage category. And because of the stage we are in, anything we do, we have to do it at a large scale. And we opened up to the customers something called subscription network. It's how the paying customers can operate at scale with very little skills and time and effort spent on it. We have like 100 petabyte type deployments, and usually it's like one guy other object storage itself is pretty easy to manage. It's really the managing of the infrastructure resources. We have we are able to do it at scale, but then how are we doing it? It is because we threw software at the operations problem. The recent announcement is all about how can you help customers run at scale with very less effort. That means you, from customer side, you have to remove the burden that where they have to hire DevOps. If they, how this is your area of expertise, right? If they have to hire Amazon-like engineers, we will be catering to a very small segment of premium customers. For us to grow across the world, we have already grown everywhere, all over the world. And these are customers coming from complete non-tech industries, and I cannot expect them to hire DevOps skills. This is where the Kubernetes operator has allowed us to productize your DevOps skills into a piece of code that you can actually have someone just set the resource constraints, and then you turn it on. It becomes a multi-tenant self-service object storage cloud. That was from the customer side. Also add a nice fancy UI while you retain the same API and all the kubectl Kubernetes CRDs. You should start, when you start, if you don't know how to spell Kubernetes, it's quite all right. Start on a nice UI and then get it all going. Over a period of time, when you do stuff repeatedly, you will eventually graduate to API driven or a command line. So these two things, the nice console and operator part, takes away the burden from the customer side. Then similarly on our side, when we are talking about adding, like our next target is to go to 1,000 customers, and it will happen in a very short window of time. And how do you get there? We cannot throw people at the problem. If it is 100 customers, 200 customers, no big deal. You can hire a few more people to handle it. But for our scale, we have to throw software at the problem. So we introduced automated multi-point inspection and diagnostics. It's basically turned support into a software problem. That way, we can handle customers at large scale with a very short SLA. So these are the things. It's all about making life easier for the customers.
Love it. Love it. Where can they go get information about this, AB?
So Min.io, everything is also 100% open source, not just about getting the information. They can actually download, try it, take it to production. Right? By the time they talk to us, usually what happens, they're already in production. In fact, like usually they get to hear from CIOs, and they're like, CIOs are hearing, oh, you didn't know we were already using us in production. And CIOs are like, you don't have a commercial relationship and you sneaked it in as part of shadow IT. And this is, for them, a data loss or a data breach or an open source license violation. People could lose jobs, right? That's the time they knock our doors. And we have made it all digital. Literally, you don't have to talk to a single salesperson. Just put your credit card, same Amazon-like experience, put in and even pay monthly. Turn it off like Netflix, like unsubscribe. You just unsubscribe and walk away if you don't like it. We made it all simple. All of the information is there on min.io, and it's 100% open source. And they get started and fall in love with the product before you choose to pay for it.
It's the way, it's called the democratization of IT. Excellent. That's min.io, min.io, correct?
Min as in minimalism.
Got it. AB, thank you so much for coming and visiting with us today. Come back on. Let's continue this. I like this conversation. We'll talk more about it. But for now, we're way over 20 minutes. I got to apologize, but thank you, and we'll see you again.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We're going to take a break, and we're going to be right back.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up is a conversation between Alan and Nithya Ruff, who is the head of Open Source Program Office at Comcast. They talk about all the really cool things that Comcast has been doing in open source these days, and some of the projects that are now in sandbox status over at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation that were developed by Comcast. Interesting stuff. Let's get right to the conversation.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another TechStrong TV segment here. My guest this segment is Nithya Ruff. Nithya is the head of the Open Source Program Office at Comcast, and we're going to talk about open source, and we're going to mention, I don't want to steal her news. Let me let Nithya talk about it. Nithya, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Alan, such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It was my pleasure, and we were talking off camera. The last time we saw each other was at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in London back in 2019.
Yes.
Which made me realize, there's one upcoming, which is going to be virtual again, so it's not really in London, it's virtual. But it'll be the second one that's gone virtual, so it just shows how far this COVID thing has taken us off track. But we look forward to doing them in person and being at conferences in person someday soon, I hope. Anyway, Nithya, you know what? Before we jump into open source, let's talk a little bit about you, if you don't mind. I don't want to embarrass you or anything, but share with our audience, how did you get to be the head of the Open Source Program Office at Comcast?
Alan, it's one of the best jobs I have had because it really taps into my passion for collaborative development and open source and frankly, innovation in general, because open source is one of the best ways to innovate. I started in open source in 1998 at Silicon Graphics, and I was part of the open source strategy team there to take us from being very proprietary as a server company to open source. And then since then, I've been building bridges from companies to community and community to company, which landed me the role of leading the Open Source Program Office at SanDisk Western Digital back in 2013. And then very soon after, as Comcast was building out their open source programs, I was recruited to join Comcast in 2017, and I've never looked back because Comcast had been doing so much open source since 2000, Alan, when Comcast started its transformation into a software company and a technology company. So my charter was to really amplify, standardize, and take it to the next level.
Absolutely. I used to love those Silicon Graphics workstations. You mentioned that, and I had like a pang of, man, were they back in the day, that the Sun servers, the Spark servers. But anyway, so you mentioned that Comcast is a software technology company, and we all have heard Mark Andreessen world, and we all kind of parrot that, and every company's a software company today. But most of our audience thinks of Comcast, and they think of, it's NBC Universal, it's the Comcast cable, it's a media network producer provider, and they don't think of Comcast necessarily as A software company, B, an open source player. And let's again, I do want to talk about the two projects we want to talk about, but I want to focus in right now, Nithya, about, tell our folks, how is Comcast a software company? Why is software a company? And then why open source?
And as you said, software is eating the world, and open source is the way software is being developed today.
Yeah.
And you can't help but be a technology and software company when you are transforming customer experiences and bringing entertainment and high-speed internet and connected living type of services to our customers. That's the way you innovate fast and quickly to market. So we've recognized that from 1999, 2000, and the company started transforming into a software development house. So you have a buildup of software developers, you have buildup of the latest and greatest software practices, working with the cloud, DevOps, Agile, and open source is a natural way to accelerate development and to use the best of the best innovation from the global community. So it was very natural for us. And in fact, my boss, John Moore, was one of the first ones to contribute back to open source in the early 2000s to the Apache Foundation. And then since then, we've been contributing back. We've even created a number of projects which we have contributed back to open source. We are members of the foundations and organizations like the Linux Foundation, Apache Foundation. And we truly feel that you cannot innovate without being a part of this global innovation community.
Absolutely, and I think you hit the nail right on the head. Because, Nithya, in my mind, we have seen sort of an evolution of open source models, right? When I like you, I got involved in open source also late 90s, right? Maybe even a little before. And I call that period the cathedral and the bazaar, right, from the book, which we've all read, right? And it really was. It was a little bit of the cathedral and a lot of the bazaar. There was a lot of stuff going on, and you had people like, Richard Stallman, who's back in the news now with Free Software Foundation controversy and stuff. But it was kind of an innocent golden age, if you will, for open source. Then in the 2000s, especially like the early 2000s to 2005, I call it sort of the Big Brother era of open source, where basically you'd have an open source project that was owned lock, stock, and barrel by one vendor, right? And everything that project did was really for the benefit of that vendor, though it was for the community, but it was benefiting that vendor. And it really, and they would say, but no, it's a community project. But what other vendor or what other company would want to contribute to that project when it was really for the benefit of this other potential competitor? And so they would go start their own. They'd fork and go start their own project, right? And then, I guess around with the Linux Foundation and the Eclipse Foundation and, some of the other foundations, we came to, what I call the foundation era of open source, which is, I'm a big Isaac Asimov fan anyway, and so that has other implications for me. But it really allowed us to have a company like Comcast, right? To be a good community member, right? And it's a two-way street. It's like you give what you get, right? And so it allowed companies like Comcast and others to really be part of the community, to contribute to projects, to use those projects. But the idea is, look, everybody gets to use the project. We all start at that ground level, zero. And what you do with it from there is up to you. but we all have the benefit of that. And it, and it's ushered in this, what I think is the greatest era of open source. I think you said it, right? That today it's all open source. And so interesting, and kudos for Comcast for being a good community member and recognizing what you get in, you put out.
Exactly
you put out,
right.
You get in.
Exactly right, Alan. I think foundations provide a neutral home for all of us to collaborate, and they also have the systems, the tools, the governance to really create ecosystems and pivot these projects forward and market these projects and make it safe to consume it and adopt it. So I'm really a big supporter of these neutral homes for open source collaboration. I totally agree with you. And for us, it's such a privilege to be able to contribute back to the commons, which has given all of us so much good. It helps us be more transparent. It helps us attract really good people into the company because they actually can see the quality of the work that we do. And I think it helps us sustain open source for the long run. If companies only consumed and did not contribute, then you would have a commons that would dry up very quickly.
Absolutely. And you made a point there. Look, developers today, DevOps people today, security people today, the whole cloud native movement is open source, just about, right? They want to work in shops where they're working with open source software. They don't want to work with closed source, right? Proprietary stuff like that, because then they're locked in. And in a market where it's kind of a buyer's market for developers, right? They get to pick and choose where they want to work because there's plenty of opportunity for them. That's how you attract top talent, which it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I attract top talent, I make better software, I put it out there, I attract it's the circle of life. And look, it's great. Kudos to you, the Comcast, and the whole team. There are a few companies I think that get it right. One, you probably know Dr. Topopal used to be at Capital One. He's over at Fidelity now, right? What he did at Capital One around open source and a lot of security was phenomenal as well, and it paid them back in spades, as it does Comcast. Anyway, so we spent all of that time. Now we can talk about what we were going to talk about today, which is two recent projects on Comcast. Why don't you tell us about it?
Absolutely. And I think these two projects, Trickster and KubeHealthy, are really an indication of what happens when you innovate inside the company and then you contribute it to the open source, and then it starts building momentum. It becomes very useful for other companies to use. And then what happened was CNCF realized how useful these two projects were, and I'll describe them a little later, and wanted to include it in their sandbox. And the CNCF goes through a technical review of candidates into the sandbox, and they look at momentum of the project, how frequently is it being used, does it have a vibrant and high quality community? Is it being well maintained, and basically the health of the community. And they approved 4 projects last month, 2 of which were KubeHealthy and Trickster. KubeHealthy was something we created ourselves because we were a big Kubernetes cluster user, and we wanted to simulate the workload on Kubernetes clusters. We wanted to understand how to run them at scale. And this became a very useful tool, which 2 of our developers, Eric Greer and Jocelyn Park, were working on. They then came to the open source program office and said, hey, we think it's going to be useful for others as well. We hear this problem. And they had presented at KubeCon a couple of years ago and realized that there was a lot of interest. So we put it through our open source advisory council, where we review and help the developers set it up for success. And then we open sourced it a couple of years ago. And then from there, it started building a lot of traction. People from all over the world started using it. They started blogging about it. And that's where we decided that CNCF was the right destination to amplify it even further and make it available to people to use.
And that seems like a no-brainer to me. So it's an incubation at CNCF right now? Is because I know they have different levels of all the way through graduation.
Correct.
So is that what it is in the incubation?
It's in the sandbox right now. And
Sandbox, which is like pre-incubation.
that's correct. Yeah. And then they monitor it through the sandbox, then incubation, then it becomes a full-fledged project.
Yeah. That's fantastic. So that's the Q1. Let's talk about the second one.
Trickster is also a fantastic project. As you know, many people use Prometheus to do dashboard rendering and to monitor DevOps and their projects. And James Ranson, who's one of our engineers who's not with us anymore, as well as Adam Ross and Chris Randalls, created Trickster to really accelerate the rendering of dashboards. And they felt that it was a bit too slow, and it renders for Prometheus, but it also does it for other software technologies for dashboarding. And that was also contributed in the very similar fashion. They came to the OSPO, the Open Source Program Office. We helped them package it and get it ready for open sourcing. And our projects first always sit on comcast.github.io, where we have hundreds of projects which we have open sourced. And then based on how successful the project is, how much traction it builds, we then try to find a home like the foundations to give it a broader set of eyes and a broader ecosystem, if you will, of users.
I love it. These are two great, good projects. One of course, is around Kubernetes, which needs no introduction. But really, I think, well, our audience knows because we have a technical, a very cloud-native focused audience. But just how big Prometheus is right now, and there's a couple of others, right? And there's a couple of companies that are very commercially around Prometheus. Lightspeed, I think, is one of them, or Light Touch, and Ben Siegelman's company from Google, and the people who make Loki, and I'm spacing on their name right now, but Loki's another open source project. But anyway, this is what people are using today for observability. This is how people are doing monitoring, as we used to call it. Now it seems to be called observability. But very, very important. You know what, if you don't mind, Nithya, so our audience loves using open source. I don't know if they're really savvy on sort of the open source management and, when you give something to a foundation, what does that really mean? Do you retain ownership of it? You retain management of it? Do you give it to them? And there was some controversy. I again, with COVID, I lose track of time frames. But there was some controversy a while back over the service mesh, Istio with Google, over owning the IP versus owning the marketing rights and all of this. If you can, using, let's say, Trickster or the Coup project, so does CNCF now own the project, the IP per se? Does Comcast still manage it? Are you just part of the maintainers, right? And then does that include also marketing these projects?
We transfer everything to CNCF, the trademarks, copyrights, the code, and it sits in CNCF's repositories. And they take over the marketing of the project, but we continue to, our maintainers continue to maintain it because we want to provide that continuity to CNCF, and also we have the expertise to continue to roadmap and move the project forward. But it really is a CNCF project now. It's a neutral project that the CNCF governance manages now.
Absolutely. And there's good reason for that too. Just because imagine transferring it to the CNCF and withdrawing your maintainers. All that tribal knowledge, all the inside information about what's going on is out the window. And then the other thing that's great about the CNCF, this model we're talking about, is if the maintainers were to leave Comcast, that doesn't necessarily mean they leave being a maintainer of the project, right? So that tribal knowledge stays with the project all the way through, right? And that's an important piece of success of it. Because, there's only so many times you can recycle stuff, and then every time you do, you lose something. And so that's, again, part of the foundation model, why it works. It just works. It's a much better model than what was before.
Much more, a sustainable model and a much neutral model, for sure.
Absolutely. So you had mentioned a GitHub. I think it was comcast.github.io. And on there, you can see all of the Comcast open source projects, not just these two.
That's correct.
And people can check that out. For these two, though, they can go to the CNCF now?
Yes, they can go to the CNCF. You'll see it in the CNCF map of projects. You should see it in their sandbox. And yes.
So let's just make sure, because that map is getting crowded these days. It could be confusing to people. So number one is Trickster. That's an easy one for me. And the second one is called Kuba.
Healthy.
Spell it.
Kuba Healthy, as in the health of. Yes.
Right.
Because
Kuba
we
Healthy.
wanted to monitor the health of Kubernetes. Yeah.
Love it. Nithya, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us a little bit today. This was great. And congratulations to you for all you're doing around open source, and kudos to Comcast for being a good community member, a good community citizen in the open source world, and we need more companies like that. So thank you.
Alan, thank you so much for the opportunity to share this with everyone.
Pleasure.
And we hope that people continue to get involved and contribute back.
Absolutely. Do like Nithya does. All right. Nithya Ruff, head of the open source projects office at Comcast, and here our guest on TechStrong TV. We're going to take a break, and we're going to be right back with another guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, Alan talks with Bill Mann, who is the CEO of Styra. Styra is the founder of OPA and Styra DAS, D-A-S. Both are making huge progress. So Bill talks to Alan about what's new and why OPA is really, really becoming a standard in the cloud native space. It's a great conversation. Let's get to it.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another TechStrong TV segment. I'm really happy to have a friend of mine on this segment, Bill Mann. Bill is the CEO of Styra. I know Bill, it's got to be Bill, maybe 15 years at least.
Yeah.
Out in Long Island at I think it was still Computer Associates. It may not even have been CA yet. And came out to visit you there, and of course you were running a large part of their identification, ID, authentication services back then. Here we are, fast forward 2021. Styra, of course, are the people behind OPA, Open Source Policy Agent, still dealing with authentication and authorization and identities and security, but you're just more wiser for it now, right, Bill?
Well, you hope so anyway.
Yeah. I think like all stages of software, it's matured and there's changes happening, right? And certainly that's one of the things I wanted to talk about today as well with you.
Absolutely. So, Bill, just a little level set. Look, our audience needs no introduction to OPA, right? It's probably one of the most successful open source projects coming out of CNCF. We of course covered its graduation. What is about 2-3 months ago? I'm going to guess.
In the January, yes.
Yeah, with COVID, my time frames get a little jumbled, but yeah, it was 2-3 months ago, and you know, in a graduating an open source project from CNCF is a very, I mean, look, not all, I forget if there are 50 or 60 projects or more in there now. We just covered 2 new ones from Comcast this morning. Anyway, you know, 50 or 60 projects, not all of them graduate, not 98% of them are not as successful probably as OPA. Why, Bill? What do you think is the reason for the popularity of OPA?
Well, I think it all comes down to what is OPA and what problem it's trying to solve in the first place. We're all familiar with authentication, which is who a person is or the identity of a service. Then there's authorization, or sometimes we call access, right? Which is, you know, what a person can do or what a service can do. And we've got to this point now in time with, you know, software development where developers want to build secure software, right? They don't want to, you know, compromise on security anymore. And they've believed for a long time that, you know, decoupled architecture is very, very important. They've decoupled architecture for authentication. Think of SAML, you know, protocols. Think of companies like Okta that provides all that identity management types of capabilities. But when it comes to authorization and access, it hasn't been decoupled. And that's what developers want to do, because they want to fundamentally reduce the risk that enterprises have around access and so forth. That's one big thing. It's, you know, I call it kind of the rise of the developer, right? But there's also obviously the move to digital transformation, the move to cloud, the fact that we're building on top of this new application infrastructure, which is all cloud native, the fact that we're putting software into production on an hourly basis and there's automation and so forth. All of these kind of macro changes are leading to, one, companies adopting cloud native architectures, which is a big push, obviously, right? And then secondly, as a consequence of that, they want more secure applications. And one of the components of security is obviously authorization or access, right? And OPA is the project for that. It's now one of the 15 projects within CNCF, which is graduated. There's a couple of more reasons, and I think, you know, let me just kind of, you know, focus on one of them, which is OPA solves authorization across the cloud native stack. Right. So when you look at the openpolicyagent.org website, you know, that we maintain, you know, as part of CNCF, you will see that it's integrated with Kubernetes, with service meshes, with databases, you know, with CI/CD systems and so forth. Because as we all know, there's access or authorization in every one of those areas. And what developers want is a standardized way of doing policy and authorization. Why should they have a different way of doing authorization for every part of the stack? If they can have a standardized way of doing policy and authorization across the stack, then you can have an individual service, the best service for it, right? You can focus on having that best service for solving that problem. It's no different than, you know, again, authentication or auditing. Think of companies like Splunk and so forth, right? They want standardized services, and standardized services means you can do a better job in terms of overall security of the environment and so forth.
Agreed. You said so many important things there, Bill. If you don't mind, I want to dive into a few of them. First of all, I think it's important that when we talk about access, you mentioned it, it's not just people, it's people and services, right? And especially in this cloud native cloud world we live in, where really, it's almost like an old-fashioned telephone switchboard where we plug a person into a service and connect a service to a person and so forth. So you need that authentication to do that, but you also need the authorization and the access control to do that.
I think one of the things that's very important about what you've just said is the number of components you had in the old stack was finite.
Exactly.
You could count them, right? Maybe it was 20 or 30, but there was a finite number of components. And look at the amount of risk we had in that environment in terms of breaches. But when you go to cloud native, everything's an individual service, right? It's also ephemeral. It's short-lived. There's automation. There's software being put into production on an hourly basis, right? So you look at the amount of dynamic change happening in this new environment, which is exactly what Google's been doing for years, because everybody now wants to build a Google-like, environment. But since there's so much change, you can't have the old approach to access, because every one of these components needs to be able, and services, as you said, need to be able to talk to another one. Can it talk to the other one? Right? Is it allowed? Yep. So that's why you need a paradigm shift in terms of how you approach the access problem, which is fundamentally why the team built OPA in the first place. OPA, it's a language, right? You define policy of code and so forth. So that's again, lots of macro changes which are kind of, speeding up the adoption of OPA.
I agree with you 100% here, Bill. I'm just trying to shut off any noises from my computer. To say it's exponential doesn't even begin to do it justice. You're right. It's almost infinite, and it's continuous in terms of the connections being done. And as you when I think about microservices, I'm reminded of when the government talks about dollars they spend, $1 billion here and $1 billion there, and before you know it, you're talking real money. Well, a couple dozen services here and a couple dozen services there, and this one came up, that one went down, it quickly outstrips the ability of a person, of a human, to sit here and plug them in.
Yeah, I think again, to kind of home in on you said service, right? Is in the old world, there were system administrators. I used to be an administrator at one point. I had to log on to a Unix machine and, configure it and so forth, right? There's less of that in this world, right? There's a lot of automation. Sure. And when there's automation, that's cool, right? But automation has to be controlled. There's got to be governance around it, right? And that's where policy, it becomes extremely important. Otherwise, you'll just have, imagine, automated cars without the governance model, right? They'll be going anywhere, right? And that's why
chaos.
Chaos, exactly. So that's why you're seeing such an adoption of OPA, right? As well as all the other cloud native kind of projects, right? Just one of the components, and we focus on just the authorization component here.
Let me bring up another area that you touched on that I want to dive in a little deeper, and that is the needs of the developer, the needs of the DevOps teams, right? When I first started DevOps.com, Bill, like you, I come from security, and I got into this whole DevOps thing because of security. And there was a prevailing notion in the security community that developers didn't care. Only security people cared about security. Developers didn't care about security. DevOps didn't care about security. But we've proven that false, I think. I think one of the revelations over the last 5, 6, 7 years is everyone does care about security. They may not all care at the same level. They may not all have the same understanding of why we do things and how we do things securely, but they care about security. And what developers want, and again, you touched on it, is consistency up and down this stack of how they interact, let's say with things like access, right? The same way access is governed at my database, access should be governed at my app server, let's say, or anywhere along this stack, in the mesh, what have you. And again, if you can give developers sense, that on its face they can see why we do it, how we do it, and gives them that consistency that they can rely on, they're going to thank you for it, and they're going to do the secure thing.
That's right.
No one's going to say, "Oh, I don't want to do that."
Yeah, that's right. I think like all areas of industry, we're transitioning, right? And where there were in the past there were some silos in terms of understanding and so forth. It's more gray areas now, right? Developers do understand more about security. Security folks understand more about developers. But at the same time, projects like OPA and even what we're building, Styra DAS, has to accommodate for the way developers look at the world, the way security folks look at the world, and the products are purposely built for those kind of environments and those kind of audiences as well, right? So, as an example, one of the use cases for OPA is around Kubernetes, something called admission control, and developers can't be required to understand all the aspects of security. So this is where we provide out of the box policy packs, right, where security can configure them, and then all developers have to do is stay within those guardrails. Think of it as guardrails. Stay within those parameters of those security policies, right? And as long as they don't wander outside of those, they're fine. But the feedback from the product is purposely designed for developers, so they can when they're outside those limits, they get feedback which they understand, right? So they can update their configurations and policies and so forth, right? So I think it is it's more, there's more gray area now in terms of roles and responsibilities within organizations versus the past where it was very discrete in terms of roles and responsibilities.
Absolutely. But look, for my money, whatever my money's worth, right? I would say the biggest positive development that I've seen in this DevSecOps space, if we can call it that, is that security companies, or companies that we would traditionally think of playing in security, perhaps like a Styra, right, have recognized that though the security people may have to sign off, that the security team's budget may pay for something like the Styra forgive me, Styra DAS, right?
Yeah, Declarative Authorization Service, yes.
Yep. The users are developers. And if you're not going to create an interface and a product that is friendly to the user, even if you sell it, they're not going to use it, right? And we've all seen enough shelfware in our life to understand the success is not just making the sale. Success is getting people to use the product to do what it's supposed to do and make things better. And I think that takes a lot of companies haven't even recognized this in security, Bill. I speak to them all the time. That if you're making tools for developers, they got to be developer friendly, not security pro friendly necessarily, though it's good to have maybe a security view of things for that security admin. But it's got to be, the tools got to fit the people using them, right? That to me is very good.
Yeah, that's right. I think the whole open source phenomena is basically saying that, right? Developers will pick up things that solves a problem for them, right, and meets their requirements and so forth. And we as a company, started, and created OPA and now are commercializing OPA with our Styra DAS, that's our core audience, right? We're listening to those folks, right? We've built a community, we listen to them, and we're taking their feedback into the product and so forth. And you're right, it's you've got to be able to balance the needs of developers and security. And there's there is a harmony there, by the way, right? There is a harmony there. And developers don't want to learn about everything about security, right? And security folks can't be, required to learn everything about the specific details of individual components in the stack as well. But yeah, there are definitely different personas, and you have to build something that meets the requirements of the audience. And for me, it's not about selling software, right? If anything, open source has taught me it's about user traction, providing to the community something that really solves the problem. And then that's where the pull happens, right? It's not the other way around. It's not pitching to them and forcing anything down, to a customer or anything like that, right? So it's a very different model as well in terms of, education first and so forth.
Agreed. Bill, I don't want to embarrass you, and I don't want to make this a product pitch or anything, but I want our audience to understand where does OPA leave off and Styra DaaS pick up, right? What are the premium feature sets that you're getting in Styra DaaS that maybe you don't get just with pure open source OPA?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The simple answer is Styra DaaS is the management plane for OPA. So OPA on its own is great for developers, but it has no user interface. It has no canned policies. There's no way of getting policy to hundreds of OPAs in the environment. There's no impact analysis. There's no enterprise features like role-based access control when there's multiple users, multiple authors of policies, who writes policies, organization do or sets of nodes and so forth. So there's none of the management capabilities as part of OPA. OPA is awesome. It can be used in production, absolutely, but many organizations want to be able to take a shrink wrap product which has got all these management capabilities already built, and they can get up and running within a couple of minutes, from a deployment perspective. So that's the fundamental difference between OPA and what we call Styra DaaS, Declarative Authorization Service, management, operational management for OPA.
Excellent. That was succinct, to the point. It made a lot of sense. Bill, let's look forward now, right? I think we've done a good job of explaining OPA. We've done a good job of authentication versus access control and so forth. But let's now, Kubernetes is king today. This whole cloud native cluster is dominant. Where do you see us in the next short term, right? 6 months, a year, 2 years? What do you think, changes? What do you think will be required of like an OPA or even Styra DaaS to remain, at the very top of the stack, if you will?
Well, I think at the most basic level, it's providing the capabilities that developers need, right? I mean, these open source projects are successful because we're listening to developers and we're giving developers what they need, right? So that's the headline from my point of view, right? And we spend a lot of time listening to developers, right? I mean, that's the basis of the company, is listening to developers and the DevOps and DevSecOps audience and giving them what they need, both from an open source, open perspective and the commercial product. I think what you're going to see more on the OPA side is more capabilities around applications, right? There's been published roadmaps and so forth for OPA where there's more capabilities around applications. On the product side, we're announcing more policy packs for the Styra DaaS product around MITRE attack surfaces and so forth, and Kubernetes benchmarks and so forth. These are all there to make it easier for an organization to adopt OPA for that Kubernetes use case and address the concerns of security. And like I said earlier on, keep developers within the guardrails, right, of their organizations, right? So a lot more usability, a lot more, impact to an organization in terms of getting up to speed as fast as possible, right? Because the adoption of Kubernetes is, as you said, exponential. OPA should grow at the same kind of rate as well, right? And now it's all about helping the developers and the organizations adopt commercial products, right? So they don't have to worry about how to get policies to those environments and how to author the policies and so forth. So those are the things that we're looking forward to at the moment, right? In terms of just building things out around OPA, right? Build out the tooling, build out the products and so forth.
Absolutely. Sounds exciting. Bill, we're almost out of time, but you know what? I tell you anyway, and again, don't want to embarrass you, but congratulations on what a great job you guys are doing at Styra. I mean, OPA you mentioned, is one of the 15 graduated projects over at CNCF out of 60 or 75 or maybe even more over there now. But you know what? In many ways, Bill, you've taken what you and I first met, as I said, 12, 15 years ago. You've built on that knowledge. You've seen where the world has gone since then, and built an open source based business model that really helps people, helps developers, helps security people deal with these real world issues that we're dealing with and will continue to deal with. So, hey, man, you know what? I'm proud to say you're my friend, Bill. You did a great job here.
Keep up the great work.
Thank you.
All right. Bill Madden, CEO at Styra, the people behind OPA, as well as Styra DAS, which Bill told you why. If you're using OPA, you might want to look at Styra DAS. Check them out. There'll be a KubeCon, I'm sure, in October, maybe in person, Bill. Let's hope.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. But until then, this is Alan Schimmel. We're on TechStrong TV. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back.
All right, welcome back. Next up, Alan speaks with Evelyn Orlick, who is the Chief Research Officer at the DevOps Institute. They talk about the DevOps Institute's recent Upskilling 2021 Enterprise DevOps Skills Report. Great findings in this report, and definitely a conversation you want to check out if you have any interest in furthering your DevOps skills. It's a great conversation. Let's get to it.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on another segment for TechStrong TV. I'm really happy to be joined by my friend Evelyn Orlick here on this segment for TechStrong TV. For those of you who don't know, Evelyn is the Chief Research Officer at DevOps Institute, of which I'm a co-founder of, and I very, very involved in. Evelyn does amazing things as part of her role at DevOps Institute, as well as in the rest of her professional career. Evelyn has a distinguished career in research and analysis, and just love having her associated with it. Evelyn, I hope I didn't embarrass you right off the bat, but welcome to TechStrong TV. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Alan, for having me. No, you didn't embarrass me, but I'm blushing a little bit.
Okay, well, sometimes you can't tell on Zoom. But anyway, Evelyn, of course, the annual Upskilling Report from DevOps Institute is out. And is this the second or third year? I forget already.
Third year. Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought, third year. And it's really, the report has really found its legs and found its audience and found its base. And there's such a great body of knowledge now that's being accumulated. But why don't you take the lead and tell our audience a little bit about, what's new in this year's Upskilling Report? And for those maybe who are not familiar, maybe we should give them a little background on the report itself too.
That sounds good. Yeah, super. Thanks, Alan. So when Jane and I met 3 years ago, in London, actually, of all places, we discussed a variety of topics and where we could do some work together. And we're like, we need to really dig into what are the skills necessary for these DevOps humans, because this journey requires a specific, kind of a human. So we started out our first report. This is our third round. This year, we've had over 2,000 people contributing. So thank you if you have contributed and you're listening. Thank you very much. We have a great representation across different globes, the different global regions. We've got good balance between Dev and Ops. We've got good enterprise, strong enterprise representation. And I think I would just say as a headline that upskilling is actually front and center for 2021. I think that's kind of like the ultimate whim of it all, because we found a lot of organizations are having still challenges. DevOps is not a piece of cake. It is still difficult, even less difficult than last year, but it's still difficult, and there are challenges across people, process, and technology. And to sustain and to continue upskilling and really developing that skill of tomorrow is what is foundational to what our findings have shown.
Absolutely. And you know, Evelyn, we've been doing a lot of sort of focus group kind of work here at Media Ops, specifically in the CXO, technical CXO kind of thing. And one of the interesting things that we've seen come out of those focus groups is that, yes, technology is challenging, and there's many areas within technology that CXOs are focused on. But by and large, their two biggest problems that are really hard, right, are culture and people, skill sets of their people, and hiring the right people and getting people who are skilled, or at least getting their existing people upskilled. And you know, technology, they could buy solutions, they could find out what the newest solution is. Getting good people in the right environment, very, very hard. And that's a global thing.
Yeah. So let me share with you quickly on the different categories. So what we've always done since the beginning, we have created domain skill domains, which makes sense. So we actually can research that, right? And we have 5 skill domains. So the human skill domain, the technical skill domain, functional skill domain, process and framework skill domain, and automation. And I'm purposely saying human because, and I try to stay away from the word soft. And Jane loves that when I say that, because there's really nothing soft about soft skills. They're hard. Technology skills, it's tough to learn about containers and all of that, but having human skills is not something you get certified in. Really, it's really hard. You learn through your experience and your exploration and your work and how you do that. But in looking at those categories at the top skill domains, we actually found that this year, 2 of them have flip-flopped, and I think it has to do with pandemic last year. Today, we know that automation is actually number 1 skill domain, followed by human. Last year, it was the other way around. And, as you imagine, in 2020, a lot of organizations needed to ensure that they could replace some of those manual tasks with automation things so that they could actually have a resilient system and resilient software, such as, some testing, continuous testing automation was introduced, a lot more CI/CD, a lot more application performance management, AI ops, monitoring, and that reduced the dependency on people. Of course, there still is the necessity to actually have human skills. And some of those skills were empathy, diversity and inclusion, of course, the typical collaboration, communication, leadership, and all of that. But also interesting what we found when we look at the top 5 versus some of the other skills is that there's a lot of opportunities and opportunistic ways to look at all of that. Let me explain what I mean by that. It's easy to hire for today, or it's easy to hire, well, easy is a challenging word, but it is easier to look at where we are today in capabilities and say, okay, I need folks around, I need more IT operations people, I need SREs, or I need value stream management. But that's for today. But what comes tomorrow? We need to think about holacracy. We need to think about chaos engineering. We need to think about data ops and model ops. And those are some of the opportunities we discovered, which is quite fascinating. So for those who actually will go download the report, it starts to be able to download next week, I believe Thursday. Have a look at the different skills, not just from the top 5, but really from the next layer down, to give yourself a journey map for where you should go, and then map that back to where you are within your organization. Because if you have the skill and you know where the capabilities are, I would call that a match made in heaven.
Absolutely. I don't disagree at all. Again, talking about COVID this past, it's always on our mind, right? So this is a very unusual year. I don't know, I know you're based in Germany, I don't know in Europe, but here in the US, it seems everyone is doing a home improvement project because we have nowhere to go. So we're upgrading the bathrooms and the kitchens or fixing a closet or, everyone's somehow doing some home improvement. Along with home improvement, people are doing self-improvement, right? They are trying to upskill, because if you are unlucky enough where you lost your job during all of this, you want to get the skills so you don't lose your job during the next downturn. And if you had a job, you want to make sure you stay on top of your game and you're, helping yourself. Did you see this play out across any of the answers this year that people are digging in?
Yes, but also there are some challenges. Actually a little bit disappointing. And I think it had to do with organizations just didn't have the money and the budget, but I'll come back to that. So we found that 39% of organizations or individuals who answered the survey out of over 2,000 said that they have no or are starting to work on an upskilling. That you could be like I am, a German optimist, and you could say, that's good. That's not as bad. But again, there's 10% of those who said, we don't even know if we have an upskilling program. So that's unfortunate. So, right. So if you look at it from a pessimistic perspective, you could say, wow, that's really bad because it's 40% almost who don't have it. But on the other side, there's 61% who say, yeah, we have done something. We have a program, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what we know is that there is some changes relative to how upskilling is being done relative to these folks, right? So there are people, for example, who learn Python in the basement because they might have lost their job and they are really motivated to do that. And that individual does not necessarily need to take a course. The learning and how people are upskilling is becoming very, very different. It's almost like a community-based learning where I learn from others. And again, I'm very happy to be part of the DevOps Institute because that's our journey. We really want to make sure that people come to us at that community level and learn from others, learn from my peers, almost like a center of excellence of people who actually can learn. But in terms of upskilling, the year before, there were more people had upskilling investments than this year. And I do really think it had to do with the budgets. Because again, in some people's heads, always still it means that I have to invest a lot of money in upskilling, which really isn't the case. There is like what we're doing.
So many
right
resources.
Now. Yeah, like what you and I are doing, these conversations, right? And learning, you learn, I learn, the people who are listening in are learning, and that is an investment of time. And I think so that in the future, as we are in this new digital world, that is a very prevalent model of learning organizations and learning individuals.
Yeah. I think you hit something there that we need to explore further. And that is this, Evelyn. Ultimately, for humans now, to say, I didn't do upskill this year, I didn't work on my upskilling this year because my employer or the organization I'm employed by didn't budget it or make it available to me. And I'm not saying they're wrong necessarily, but at some point the buck stops with yourself. It's your own career, your own thing. And if you're going to wait for your employer to do it, you're at their beck and call on when they're going to do it, how they're going to do it, where. I think to a certain extent it's a bit of personal responsibility in your, and maybe that's a geographic thing, because I know, again, speaking to Jane Grohl, who is my partner and the CEO at DevOps Institute, she's always told me that, geographically, in some areas of the world, the organization, the employer pays for formal training. In other parts of the world, the individual pays for their own training. And that's okay. But as you say, in today's world, there's so many free resources. If you have pride in your profession, pride in what you do, I think you got to invest in yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's also, Alan, a demographic, as you say, demographic regions, but there's also a generation, a generational difference. I wish I could ask for age, but I didn't. It's one of those things, right? We did ask for, a variety of other things, but knowing from other research I've done, how individuals learn has also to do with the different generations. Millennials and digital natives learn very differently than, for example, my age. I'm a baby boomer. I used to take DBA classes, and I read books and so on and so on. So I think that's another influence. But that is something I'd love to, as we're kicking off the thinking for next year's, the 2022, I love to dive further into that learning and how organizations and individuals prefer to learn. And for us at the DevOps Institute, same for you guys at MediaOps, it's important because we can tailor our work towards those who actually needing to go down that journey and deliver it in whatever ways they want, videos, chat rooms, whatever the different types of mechanisms there are. Some people take certifications. That's another important thing we learned. We found, because as you remember, we've had this argument in this conversation about, how valuable are certifications? Well, actually 64% of survey respondents said very valuable.
Almost
So,
two-thirds.
yeah, that is fantastic. So getting certified as a DevOps foundational individual, getting a leadership certification, an SRE certification, those are all fantastic things to do. And you can wrap this around with some of the, you can see some books behind here. There's a whole bunch of things, and then watching videos and others to develop myself. But you have to take by your head and really get into it.
It's bootstrapping is what it is. You got to lift yourself up by your own boots. And I will tell you, part and parcel with upskilling, or not part and parcel, but in addition to Upskilling Report, some of the big news recently out of DevOps Institute was the general availability of their membership association program, right? And there's a free component. You could be a free member. There's paid membership levels, etc. But it's directly tied into this, right? What is the mission of the membership? It's of DOI's membership program. It's to help these people get upskilled, be successful in this arena, right? And it's not all about taking a DevOps Foundation class or one of the other DevOps Institute classes and certifications. It's about, from a partner or something. It is about the humans, about their own journey and how they choose to hopefully continue that journey onward and upward in upskilling and becoming upskilled. And, while you and I'm at the tail end of the baby boomers. Well, I'm in the baby boomers. I'll leave it at that. But anyway, yeah, we do have a very, I guess, not old school, but, we have a very stylized way of how we think about learning and getting trained and upskilling. But that's okay. I think one of the lessons for today's world is there are many paths. That sounds kind of Zen, right? There are many paths to nirvana, to the end goal. No matter what path you take a path. It's better than sitting here contemplating or telling me why you didn't. Right? 39% of the people didn't because their employer didn't. That, I know you're an optimist. That bums me out, that number. Right? 40% of these folks are sitting around waiting for someone to kick them and say, hey, go get upskilled.
Yeah, I'm the only German optimist you find, by the way.
Yeah, well, that's why I thought that was very ironic, yes. But, what can I tell you? But anyway, but that is. Evelyn, we'll move on a little bit. Give us some other key findings that kind of really got you going with this year's report.
Yeah, so leaders and individual contributors, if we look at the distribution of the must-have skills, like I said, all the different domains are aligned. So that's the good news, right? They all pretty much the same. Think about, where they need to focus on automation skills, human skills, technology, and so on. I think the other interesting finding was that even so, 39% said that they don't have upskilling. There are two prevalent ways of DevOps methodologies or models which are key. One is the learning organization. 70% said that their prevalent way of working is that learning organization. So that is interesting, and need to dive into that a little bit more details. The second one is safety culture, truly having the ability to speak up, and kind of like the Andon Court, right, at the Toyota factory way back with the Deming model, where you could actually say, hey, some constructive criticism relative to what we need to do. Two other things which pleasantly surprised, because those are my two favorite topics. One was site reliability engineering. No matter if it is the Google model or a slightly modified way, but way up, double point digit growth in terms of adoption, and a number 5 top must-have skills. So as I'll say an old system administrator, because I administered, HP 3000s and JCL and all of that, which was fun to do, year 2000. But those folks who are in system administration today have sometimes a challenge to be recognized as an engineer. This is an awesome opportunity to actually make yourself a path towards become an engineer. Speaking to clients and customers today, we see that SRE is an incredible different operating model to really help the speed and the velocity and the quality and the automation. So that's exciting. The other one is value stream management. Again, VSM has gotten a bit of a bad reputation because a lot of organizations didn't understand what it was. The vendors were pushing the topic. And as an analyst, I can say, well, here's another 3-letter acronym, another TLA, which really kind of 2 years ago wasn't anything. People knew value stream mapping, but they confused it with value stream management. And
I think they still do.
Yeah, it is not the same. I mean, one is part of the other, but value stream management is a bigger topic than value stream mapping. But I'm absolutely excited to say that value stream management actually got a lot of votes for must-have skills as well. So for those who are listening in, go brush on your value stream mapping and the understanding of value stream management, because that is going to be an important aspect of the future.
Agreed. We do, I call them TV shows. They're video shows bi-weekly. We have one called DevOps Unbound, CISO Talk. We are actually spinning one up right now called the SRE Show. And it's going to be sponsored by our friends at Noble 9. And I think I'm recording the first episode of that this week or early next week. So that's coming. And I'm actually talking to Helen about doing something around vSIM as well. And because we see that, it's funny, when you see these things running parallel, like what rises on our radar scope, and it matches up what you're seeing in Upskilling Report findings, it kind of reinforces that. And these are the trends that we're also seeing. And
I have another idea for you, Alan.
What do you got?
Another surprise.
Go ahead.
I started my IT career in 1994 after college at a very large company doing IT operations. And of course, didn't have any mainframes. But I remember then when I shifted on to become an analyst at Forrester in 2006, people were saying, well, Evelyn, you don't really need to worry about the mainframe because soon it will be dead. Ha, ha, ha. 17%. Hello, 17% of the survey takers said that mainframe is not dead. It's a must-have skill. And must have.
So our third show, Evelyn, you're like my shill in the audience. Our third show is called The Open Mainframe. It's with John Murtick, who runs the Open Mainframe project for the Linux Foundation. And we are recording that first one either this Friday or next Friday, depending when you're watching this. And yes, that's our third show, The Open Mainframe. So again, amazing stuff. How it
Confluence. It's called Confluence.
Yeah, it's a confluence. Wow. But yes, we see it too. The and the first episode of Open Mainframe is on COBOL, because you know what? It's alive, well, and thriving. I mean, what you can do with it, and we're excited with that as well. The Open Mainframe, also here on TechStrong TV. So all three of those shows are spinning up, and we think these are the hot areas that people are interested in.
Yeah, excellent. Well, good. Let me see if I can think of another one.
I can't do any more shows, Evelyn. I got all I can handle right now. But if you do, you're hosting it.
Well, one of the things we're digging into, just for the future, so that you know, and Helen is really engaged in that quite a bit, is all this understanding about neuroscience and human skills and how do you develop that, right? There is a lot of capabilities and research around network skill mapping and how are people put best in place relative to networks, who is a good project manager or product manager, who is a good lead for, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a really good article in the latest HBR I just got, Harvard Business Review, which points to that. I'd love to do some more research there, but that means I would be sidetracked. And I know Jane wants me to fill and complete our our skill books, because those will need to go live as part of the membership. So I'll have to wait until the
we'll work something out. We'll work on something with that. More on that later. But we should mention that the Skill Up report is available over on that DevOps Institute next week. Well, by the time people watch this, it'll be next week. And the Skill Up books you're talking about are available to members of the DevOps Institute membership, and there is a free component. So and there's a student level, and there's many different ways of participating there. So do check that out. It's DevOpsInstitute.com. All of this stuff that Evelyn's talking about is there, as well as like last year's report, the year before report, so you can really start, seeing this as it evolved. Evelyn, thank you so much for coming on. I know it's later in the day at your house, and I appreciate you taking the time out. Great work on this year's Skill Up report. Looking forward to hearing more and more about it. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks for having me, Alan. Great talking to you.
Great speaking to you. Evelyn Orlick, Chief Research Officer at the DevOps Institute here on TechStrong TV. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and Media Ops CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, we have our regular installment of CISO Talk. This one is about women in technology. Speaking with Karen Moore, who is the Chief Compliance and Privacy Officer at Unisys, and Michelle Beastie, who is the Chief Ethics, Compliance, and Privacy Officer at the Nature Conservancy. They talk with Alan and Mitch Ashley and Matt Newfield of Unisys. They talk about the value of gender diversity, how to attract and develop to top talent, and how to create opportunities for growth and advancement, including as well as how to recognize, uncover, and remove hidden biases. It's a great conversation and one very, very relevant. Let's give it a listen.
Hey everyone, I'm Alan Schimmel, and you're watching another episode of CISO Talk. Of course, CISO Talk is a bi-weekly video series that examines relevant topics in cybersecurity and technology. And we've got a great one lined up for you today. Before we jump into the topic, though, I wanted to introduce you to our panel. First of all, my co-host and, one of the catalysts behind CISO Talk is my friend Matt Newfield. Matt, welcome. And Matt, maybe you just want to introduce yourself for people who aren't familiar.
It's a pleasure, Alan, as always. So my name is Matthew Newfield. I'm the Chief Security and Infrastructure Officer here at Unisys Corporation. So I cover both the CIO function as well as the CISO function.
Fantastic. Good stuff, Matt. Joining us today, we have actually a returning guest, Karen Moore. Karen, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Thanks, Alan, and thanks for the return invite. I had so much fun last time. So Karen Moore, and I am the Chief Compliance and Privacy Officer at Unisys.
Thank you, Karen. And then joining us for the first time, and Michelle, I apologize, my glasses aren't on and I can't read your name as well. I don't want to mess it up, though. Michelle, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to the audience and a little background.
Sure, thanks so much. I'm Michelle Beistel, and I am the Chief Ethics, Compliance, and Privacy Officer for the Nature Conservancy, and used to be at Unisys.
Fantastic. And then last but not least is my co-host in business for many, many years, Mitch Ashley. Mitchell, welcome. You want to just give a quick background?
Sure, you bet. Great to be here and always enjoy this wonderful panel. I'm Mitch Ashley. I'm CEO of Accelerated Strategies Group, an analyst firm that focuses on cybersecurity, as well as digital transformation, cloud native, DevOps, software, how it's transforming our world. And so it's great to be here. I'm excited to have Michelle on for the first time, and I'm detecting this thread of Unisys here somehow. I picked up
somehow there seems to be a 6 degrees of separation of Unisys, but
not even.
but in any event, today's topic is women in technology, and that's a loaded title in today's world. Obviously, there's so many different aspects of this, and I think when we talk about women, there's the aspect that deals with diversity in general, and then there's an aspect that deals strictly on gender, not necessarily on race, color, or creed. And I don't want to limit our scope today to just gender. I do want to talk though about women in technology, and what are some of the challenges. What are some of the things I think that are structurally maybe built into our system that is holding back further change, and what you, our audience, can do about it? Karen, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to kick us off here, and then we'll go into our usual feel free to jump in format.
Sure, Alan. I almost don't know where to start because there is a large part of me that resents having to talk about women in anything. I hate the idea that I've been denied an opportunity because of my gender, but equally as we course correct, I also question whether I should be given an opportunity because of my gender. And so it's a really, kind of tiresome but incredibly important topic. And I'm starting to wonder if the next generation doesn't have it a little bit better. This kind of whole non-binary movement, not just from a sexual orientation perspective or gender identity perspective, but the real concept of degendering things, starting with language. You see that Michelle and I and Jody all have our pronouns there because now people's pronouns are important. They're an important part of their identity. And that concept that we can degender something is very appealing to me. Hungarian, for example, has no gendered pronouns at all, and I can't help but wonder if that doesn't affect their perception of people and their capabilities when they're having these types of discussions. So that's where I am. I'm kind of in a position where I want to talk about women in tech to the extent that I'd like to stop talking about women in tech, that there's equal opportunity and equal perception and equal capabilities.
You know, it's funny you bring up Hungarian. I'm not a linguist expert, but Hungarian is such a, you know, it doesn't even, I don't even believe it's in the Indo-European language. It comes from a very, where everything else in Europe is, and all the way down to India, it's Indo-European. Right, Hungary and Finnish are probably the two closest related, and they come from a different root altogether. And maybe there is something in Western languages, and you know, that gets to this whole sexual gender thing. And I'm not so sure the next generation's going to have it easier. Let me put that as a premise out there. Michelle, what do you think? I mean, guys, you know, it's a big topic.
I certainly share the hope that, you know, 5 years from now, the same group, a similar group, you know, recording something, our topic wouldn't be women in tech. It would be just about people in tech. Have that hope as well. I don't know if I'd say it's going to be easier for the next generation, but I do think that societal norms and the way these conversations are happening, not just in corporations, but happening in schools, in our communities, with people that influence us as we grow up, I do think that's going to make a difference. And I think it's mostly, it's not just changing how women think, right? It's changing how everybody thinks. All people have to think differently about how we differentiate ourselves, keep that differentiation, which is important because we're all individuals. So we don't want to lose the aspect that is good, that we're all individuals, we all approach things differently, but we want to be judged for our individual merits instead of on these characteristics that we come into this world with. So I do think that kids that are growing up now, because this conversation is happening out in the world, I think there will be more awareness, which will lead to better outcomes for all of us.
I think that's one of the more interesting things that I see today is that the conversation can be had, and it doesn't have to be, you know, had behind closed doors or with lawyers present or in an awkward scenario. And you know, one of the things that I'm always curious about in this conversation is, what does good look like in this scenario? What are we really striving for? And I love the idea of people in technology. You often in conversation we talk about, you know, what do we care about in technology? And I always tell people I care about one part of your anatomy. No matter what, there's one part of your anatomy I really, really care about, and anatomy is probably the wrong term, and it's what sits between the back of your skull and your eyeballs, right? Your brain. How do you think? What do you think? Can you solve problems? Do you understand the technology? But that seems very foreign to people in the world, and I think we've all experienced some of the hardships, maybe the right word, some of the stereotypes, some of the issues when it comes to getting to people in technology. So what can we do about that? How do we help people today? And how do we help so that in 5 years we can see something that is paramount to success or close to success as compared to having this conversation? Because I'll shut up in half a sec, but I feel like 5 years ago, we were having these kinds of conversations about diversity in the workplace, diversity in cybersecurity, gender gaps in cybersecurity. I mean, it was at a major conference quite a few years ago. This was the conversation du jour about what percentage of cyber or technology is actually women. And I remember being at this presentation, there was an argument on stage because people were saying, well, the number is a lie because someone's secretary is marking themselves as being in technology. And that sparked a whole argument on stage of, why do you assume a secretary is a woman as compared to a male secretary? And it sort of, we all left. So what does good look like, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, I love that idea of what does success look like, you know, not talking about women, talking about people in tech, but how do we get there, and why tech? Why specifically tech? I mean, nobody talks about women in HR. If you're going to have a senior executive that's a female in your team, it's probably going to be the HR person and not the CISO. And at what point does that paradigm shift? And I think, Michelle, you may be a little optimistic in a 5-year perspective, because we've been talking unisex since the 60s, right? Trying to say chairperson instead of chairman, and trying to measure the number of women in executive positions. And that's shifted so slowly. But why technology? And I can't help but feel that technology is this really unique bubble where it's this big club that literally has its own language or languages. And that if you can break into that bubble, you're fully accepted because you're just one of the techies. But getting to be a techie, why is that such a bar for women to achieve? Are we not aiming there because we feel that we won't be let into the club? Is that the problem? Where's the barrier? Where's the entry point that we're not flooding into?
So let me. I'm sorry, go ahead, Mitch.
I was just going to add. I keep thinking about different leadership roles that I've played, and I remember a time where it was blame the recruiter. You're not bringing me people like this, right? Of this sex or this a particular aspect of our society. And I think the thing I've learned, maybe it's just for myself, is there's sort of this light switch of nobody's going to do anything about it unless I do something about it. I mean, if we all took that attitude, and I don't mean to make it sound like it's a problem, that I'm going to go solve on my own or that kind of thing. I have the great fortune, and I really mean this sincerely, of having a stepdaughter who is in the generation of people you were talking about, Karen, that are in this transformation from binary sex to non-binary, and a lot of the transformations that we see trying to happen in our society. And it's a great opportunity to learn, but I have to kind of realize I have to unhook what I think I know and start to learn from other people what those obstacles are, and not just to sort of tamp it down and make it go away. Is how do we just get rid of that obstacle? You mentioned HR. I had the good fortune working with an HR person. We were talking about salary diversity, compensation diversity, and so we just said, well, who's going to stop it if we just go find out what the difference is and then up everybody's salary who needs an adjustment? Don't make it a step. Make it equal. Let's just do it. And so those are the kind of things that I try to look for in learning from, you, Karen, Michelle, and Matt. I mean, people that are really making a conscious effort and who believe this is important.
So I want.
Oh, go ahead, Alan.
I'm sorry, Matt. I'm going to take my host prerogative here and grab it. So, to the point of why tech, right? I have a good reason, and I have good reasoning behind why tech. But I think to understand why tech, we have to understand why is tech different and what's going on in our world, right? And I think it's a good thing, especially right now. We see it happening right now. The fight for equality in this country that's supposedly the freest country on earth is ongoing every day. We haven't passed an equal rights amendment. It's been kicking around since I was a teenager, and I'm 60. We can't get it passed. There are bills in a majority of states in this country today that want to take away the rights of transgender people that haven't yet declared gay, lesbian, bisexual, queer, whatever, as equal people in this country. So we could talk about tech, and I'm going to tell you why tech should lead the way. But we have to fundamentally realize that in this country, and we're supposed to be the beacon, where maybe we are, maybe we aren't, we haven't put an even playing field for people of gender, based on gender bias or sexuality or diversity, to play on an even field. Forget about tilting it or giving them an advantage. We haven't gotten that equal field yet. Why tech though? When COVID came in, last year and we stopped going to conferences, this show plays on something called TechStrong TV. And why tech? Because I believe that tech does offer a better way. We are a global community. We are, in many ways, the ultimate meritocracy. We want to judge people by how good the code they write is, not what color or what kind of fingernails and finger paint they have when they're typing that code, right? Technology, and let's not forget that technology right now is the alpha predator on the pecking order. Because without technology, where would we be? Sitting in our homes with candles, right? Not afraid to go out, praying to some shaman or something to help us from this terrible pandemic, right? So technology, it has to fulfill its role, which is to lead. And, we call it TechStrong TV, and that's what this is on. Tech needs to be strong on this. Tech has to lead the way on this because we can't expect or wait for the rest of society to show us the way. We need to show the way. So with that said, I'm going to step off my soapbox now and, Matt, let you go ahead with it.
So I do agree tech is the great equalizer because, again, in this field, we don't care, right? I personally, as a technology executive, what I care about is not anything about you as a person. What I care about is what you can do in our organization. Hard stop, right? And the rest of it doesn't matter to me. What actually matters, though, is the more diverse the group, generally the better the outcome, right? Because it's diversity in thought and experience and all these great things. But it still goes back to one of the core problems, and I think we've all touched a little bit here. I'd love to get the thoughts is, to be honest, this is not for me to solve. I cannot solve this problem. And it is a problem because we're still talking about, so it's still a problem. But I think one of the problems is there are those of us that sit and go, well, I'm going to solve this issue, and I cannot solve an issue that is not for me to solve. I think that's one. And two, I think what a lot of people don't do well is listen. When I recently was asked to chair our United by Diversity, we have AIGs inside of our organization. The first thing that group asked me is, what am I going to do for them? What am I going to do? And it was a pretty simple response. It's just listen and learn. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to listen and learn. And if I can knock down any barriers, if I can give a perspective, that's wonderful. But I'm here to listen and learn. And that's the same thing here that I look to Karen and Michelle and anybody else who will listen is what can we assist with? How can we help make a difference so that as we continue down this path, especially in technology, because let's be honest, that's our bread and butter, we can be a part of the change instead of always feeling like we have to lead the change.
I just chime in. I completely agree. And I want to comment on two things. One, I think that, Matt, you touched on this, and Alan, I really appreciate the perspective you shared. But why technology? Why is it so important? As you described, Alan, technology is what we all rely upon in our everyday lives. And if we are leaving out statistically, half of the population of the world in helping to develop technology for future generations, it's going to continue to be biased. It just is. If you only are bringing one gender type predominantly to developing technology, implementing it, innovating, figuring out where it can be helpful, there's going to be a whole lot we're going to miss, and it'll continue to increase the divide that we already see, I think, in technology. So I think that's the other why technology and why it's so important. And then what does success look like? Matt, I think what you said, I think where we maybe, I'm going to just speculate here, where maybe we have gotten hung up on as a country, as a society, and not passing some of these things, is we look too big. And we certainly should have big goals, and we should have them, but we have to look at those incremental places that we can say, you know what, that was an excellent thing. We just achieved some success here. And to me, the fact that we are having these conversations, that Mitch and Matt and Alan, you are talking about your learning journeys. That is huge as men in this world. I think that is the piece. You're not going to solve it. I absolutely agree. It's going to take everybody. But so much of that is each of us taking in and raising that awareness, recognizing the problem, and having these conversations. And then agreeing that there's some incremental steps. Don't get so overwhelmed with like the huge problem, but what incrementally can we do?
And I'm sorry, I really liked what Matt said about the listening. And it's not just the listening, it's the open-mindedness. Because one of the why tech answers, I think, is that it's a very multifunctional, diverse by subject matter area. This is not, you don't have to be an MIT graduate to be a woman in technology. And Lord knows I've been dragged into technology backwards through the hedge, kicking and screaming, sometimes by Matt, with a person who doesn't have a tech background. And Matt, you just said to me the other day, you are a woman in technology. You work for a tech company. You're working on technology issues. And the things that I bring to the table are not the how do we solve the multi-tenant server problem, but understanding what the multi-tenant server problem is and what the behavioral components are that are creating difficulties in the exposure of data. And then there are other people there that are solving the technical side of it, and other people who are innovating and implementing ideas, and the kind of the diversity, not just of gender around the table, but of thought process and experience and the contribution. I think tech lends itself to a very open-minded acceptance of different viewpoints, and including different gender positioning, because it is multifunctional. I think that the days of tech being equal to somebody sitting and coding is a very limited perspective, and those days are gone.
It's interesting, Karen, too. It sort of tech is not only the great equalizer from we all can have access to it. Tech doesn't care what gender we are. Tech doesn't care what color we are, what color our hair is, whether we're 60 or 9 years old or whatever.
Whether we have hair or not.
Or whether we have hair or not, or whether we ever had hair.
There's something women can bring to the table.
But tech shouldn't, but we've all read articles just in the past, 10 years about security technology that has been developed. And when they tested it, it had biases. Yeah. It had ethnic biases, it had gender. So I agree, but I just do want to point that out that there's still, it should be neutral, but if you have coders that are bringing some unconscious or conscious biases, it's not always.
Maybe it starts neutral.
But that brings the people aspect into it. I mean, we could go down a rabbit hole here of, we all talk about home automation, right? It's one of my favorite personal conversations to have with people, and smart assistants in our homes, right? Whether it be one large company or another large company. Interestingly enough, and as a male, I never really thought about it until recently, that all three of the big ones, they're all women voices, right? Female voices. They all have female names. They are all female. And if you insult them, right? And I don't know if you've seen the videos or watched it, the responses are not, that's inappropriate, don't be a jerk. It's, that's your opinion, sweetie. And these really weird, not, in my opinion, normal responses. So it does lend, tech is the great equalizer because it can be whatever we want it to be. And unfortunately, if there are people in tech who want it to be a problem, it will be a problem. But it also goes to me to this conversation is, okay, so there's also a lot of misunderstandings. We'll just go with misunderstandings of what it takes to be in tech. What does your background need to be? Do you have to be a math genius? Do you have to have a degree starting in high school, then undergrad, then grad to get in tech? And I'll just point out on a personal level, I had a psychology degree. I ran restaurants when I was in my early 20s. That's what I did. I thought I wanted to do it. I tell my wife back in the day, my dream was to open my own restaurant. Now that's more like my nightmare. And we could all tell of our stories, especially those that are in some of the older generations. There was no cybersecurity. There was not even a lot of real tech degrees where we came from. So how can we help the transformation with that in mind?
I think
here we are. Yeah, here we are helping.
Exactly. And I think it isn't, no offense to lawyers, you don't have to go to law school to be, you do to be a lawyer, but you don't have to be a cybersecurity professional. You can self-learn. You can on the job learn. You professionally learn too. I mean, I started my career, first job out of college was with EDS. Their model was bringing in and training teachers, educators to learn to be programmers, we called them back then. And our whole heritage is, of course, with programming coming from, Grace Hopper and we had a number of women in the beginning of our industry. But I guess my point is, there isn't an entrance criteria to tech. Anybody can learn it. And so it's probably more of a, how do you remove the biases of what we might limit ourselves or others limit us to? And how do we create opportunities for people to have access to go do those things?
Well, and Mitch,
so I'm going to disagree.
Oh, no,
you
can't.
disagree,
Sorry,
Alan, and then I'll ask. I was going to just ask Mitch a question because I think it's really interesting. Do you think that women self-limit because of those perceptions, that we're the ones that are not jumping into tech because we feel like we have to have that background and degree?
I think just the fact that we have the belief, and I think it's more than just women, of the sciences, the STEM, women in technology, it's so deeply rooted into our society that it can be undone, and people every day prove, what's possible. So the same people who create the bias or live the bias can uncreate it, can undo it. But you have to consciously say, that's not a limit. I'm not letting that group of people define me. I'm going to go do what I think I'm capable of doing, and maybe have a great mentor or a set of mentors along the way that's helped me, not let myself be my own limitation, no matter who I am.
So I'll give a piece of controversial advice. So there are a lot of bad people in the world. There are a lot of bad people in leadership positions. There are a lot of bad executives across the field, right? It doesn't matter if it's technology, cybersecurity, HR, legal, there's bad people. And unfortunately, a lot of bad people create a lot of the barriers that we're talking about. If you're in an organization as a male, as a female, as a non-binary, no matter how you see yourself, if you don't feel you're in an organization that sees you for what we're talking about here, and again, it's the brain and your ability to accomplish great things, you're in the wrong company. I do put some of it back on us as individuals. I've left organizations because I did not believe in the culture. I did not believe they saw me for who I was. And I think, especially in technology, where there are a lot of opportunities and there are a lot of hiring executives who are looking for great people, great people, right? Not I need, and Karen, you brought this at the beginning and I couldn't agree more, not I need to hire 3 more women. Find me 3 women so that my numbers are good. I don't really care, because that sets you up for failure as a person. But maybe taking some introspective time as well. That this is something you want to do, and you're not getting it where you are. Make a change. You can make a change, especially in the world of COVID. A lot of I don't live in an area where they're office. All that went away because we're not in offices either. And you can really make some powerful changes for yourself. And companies and leaders who don't believe in this are going to fail. They're going to fail because people are going to leave them in droves. And it's not just the women who will leave them, the men will leave them as well. I don't want to work for someone who believes.
Yeah.
And a couple of things. Also, maybe sorry, Alan, because I cut you off before.
No, go ahead.
I was just also thinking that it's how we define tech as a field that's important as well. There's a really interesting interview with Ellen Hunt, who's just a star in the compliance space, and she was with AARP and was asked to take on audit, so she took on audit, and now she's with a big healthcare company, and she was asked to act as the CISO, and she's being asked, do you you don't have any background whatsoever in cybersecurity. Isn't that important in order to be the CISO? And she said, absolutely not. I can do this. I just surround myself with really great people that have the cyber background. They're going to educate me. And so I think it's redefining that, and also reaching out, reaching across those functions to bring people in, which, Matt, I have to say, at the risk of blowing your head up even bigger, you are so genius at. I mean, there is no question that I feel is too dumb to ask you, can you help me understand this? Can you make me a better person doing what I do to understand better what you do? Those conversations are what make me a woman in tech, which I never would have dreamed as defining myself.
Fair enough. So two thoughts on some of the comments out here. Number one, in terms of what stops women themselves, right? Karen, your point was, many women just feel like, I can't do that. I think there's been a lot of articles and research lately that this starts kicking in at puberty, right? That when girls, prepubescent girls and boys, girls actually do better in STEM than boys. But at some point around puberty, there's some sort of bias that kicks in that says, no, you're not as good as the boys on this, right? Or, yeah, that's a boys thing. Go play with dolls, or something stupid like that. And so that by the time that girl is 12 or 13, and by the time they're 18, which is when you would start, revving up your career that way, or 20, whatever, that, oh no, you can't do it, has already been baked in, right? So you can't, women shouldn't beat themselves up over this. I think it's largely institutional, that it's baked in, and it takes a rather strong individual to say, screw that. I'm as good or better than any of them. The caveat, though, is this. Matt, how long are you in tech now? 25 plus years, 30 years? Me and Mitchell are too. Karen and Michelle, I realize, not as, you're much younger. But I don't think people like cybersecurity, right? There was no cybersecurity training when we got into security, but today there is. Today, when you're hiring cybersecurity people, you're looking not only at their relevant experience, but at their relevant education in cybersecurity. The other thing is, because that tech has gone global, you're not just competing with the person in Virginia or Colorado or Florida. You're competing against the thousands of graduates, freshers coming out of school in India, or Singapore, or China, or Eastern Europe, right? This is a global marketplace, and if it's truly a meritocracy, having that training, having that background, has got to give you an edge. It's got to. I don't think it's as easy as it was for I call them kids, for young adults coming out today, entering the space without formal training.
I think, though, it's very important that as leaders, as teachers, as educators, as parents, we have to be self-reflective. We have to listen more. When, a couple of years ago, I was on stage with a young lady who was in university for cybersecurity, and the story she gives about the teachers not listening, that she was the only girl in her class, having to deal with all the boys asking her out and her turning them down, that she got a bad reputation. And, some of the struggles that she went through, all I could get in my head was, how did the teacher not know that? How could you be in a classroom where this is going on? And I think we all, and I would say that in business as well, is you've got to pay attention. For me, if one of my direct reports, only one, for example, could be a woman, to make sure that she doesn't feel like a secretary. And you've got to really listen and pay attention, and you have to be self-critical, right? I am not right. Hard stop. I'm not right. I am just a voice among many voices. And if we're going to make a change here, we've got to really start listening. And for some people, depending on how stuck you are in your viewpoints, you may be in a situation where what you're hearing sounds crazy, right? You're like, there's no way that this is going to make sense. But if it's someone else's viewpoint and it's not hurting you, we have to listen with an open mind.
Well, and listen at all. Sorry, Michelle.
Oh, yeah. Just, Matt, it's funny you mentioned I was in the audience when Matt was in that panel, and that was coming to my mind as we were talking about how do you change that paradigm, Alan, that you were identifying, the puberty shift, for lack of a better term, when it seems the shift that more girls, start to become less interested in STEM, which will lead them then likely to not pursue the level of education they might need in our industry today, in the cyber industry today. And Matt, in that same session, you might recall, you talked specifically about giving kids some way to develop experience, interest in cyber in middle school. And part of that does require providing them with mentors, with role models. And I think, Mitch, you mentioned mentorship, which we haven't really talked about, but I think that's a huge component of how we continue to change the paradigm. And that listening and learning, it always helps if you're listening and learning from someone who you can identify with, who, if they don't look like you, at least has some kind of background or experience that you can share. And that can be in a variety of forms, but I think developing those mentors and getting them out into the world to start influencing the next generation of women and non-binary individuals will also help us to change this shift.
Michelle, I think there's another factor to add to that, and that is recognizing I will never experience what it's like to be a woman in the workforce, or of any other perspective like that. But what I can commit to is I can commit to, as Matt talks about, listening and learning. And because there's a lot I don't know. I mean, there's much more that I don't know than I do. And I think that recognition of it's just impossible. I could not really fully embrace, understand, and know what that experience is like in any way. But I certainly can listen to what you can teach me, what you can share with me, and that'll influence how I think and how I act, and I can help others.
I think it's listening, but it's also demonstrating that you're listening. I cannot count, and this is not just in the technology space, how many times I have said something and not been heard in a business context. So I think that kind of extra effort to demonstrate that not only did I listen to you, but I heard what you said. I might not agree with you or incorporate it or act on it, but I at least heard you.
You heard. Yeah. No, I get it. I mean, in our own exec team, unfortunately, we only we have three women who are, out of 8 or 9 folks. So it's only about a third. And I'm really cognizant of that, because as I've learned to recognize my own white male privilege, I've recognized how often in conversations, even in here, right? Who wants to talk next? Well, wait, I'm going to go, Michelle. You have to wait for me. That's not the way life should be, right? Especially I, as the host, I should let you talk more. But Karen, Michelle, I mean, feel free to speak up. How many times in conversations is like these men mansplain and talk over you, right? And even when you do talk, as you say, they don't really hear you. Okay, good. Now let's get on to what the next guy said. And when you become sensitive to it, you start seeing it over and over and over again. And, as Mitchell said, you try to recognize it, you try to compensate for it, but
I don't see anybody mansplaining to Michelle or Karen.
Yeah, you probably got bad examples here, but it is, and getting back to technology as the leveler, I do feel that when you have something intelligent to say and you're speaking the right language, you do get heard right away. I think more quickly in technology than in some other spaces when you're talking more strategically, maybe. And so I'm still climbing. I am a total language freak. I was a Soviet Studies and Russian major in college, and this is a language. Technology is a language. You have to learn how to speak, and people will listen if you're saying the right thing, saying something smart.
I think the other thing is this is where I think, folks like Matt and Alan and Mitch, you are and you can be great mentors to women in the field by exemplifying that behavior that doesn't mansplain, that provides room for all thought, that invites women into the conversation. And then there's the part of it where for all, this really is not just gender-based, but delivering that leadership type training experience so people know how to show up at a meeting, to be heard. I agree, Karen, there are definitely times when, as a woman, I have not been heard primarily because I'm a woman, but there are things that I knew that were within my control, but I only knew them because I watched mentors do it, or I had leadership sessions, or I was told, like, try this if you're not being heard. And some of that, it's just, again, getting that experiences and being offered the chance to get the experiences. And I think that's where being aware and keeping our biases, trying to recognize our unconscious bias that we all have and keep it in check helps us to be those mentors that women need.
I like that.
And not be defensive, right? I have mentors and I am a mentor, and I'm constantly trying to get feedback and criticism and taking that criticism. And the problem is, again, in these scenarios, if you become overly defensive, people won't give you the honest truth, and then it becomes even more of a bad thing. And, the other piece of advice I give anybody watching this is, when we talk about mentors, I think a lot of times we want a mentor that looks like us, talks like us, acts like us, is us, right? Because it makes us comfortable, no matter what you are in your head. So while that's a good thing, because I think women should have a women mentor to show that you can be successful. I love that. But getting someone to be your mentor that does not look like you, that does not sound like you, does not act like you, I think is equally as powerful, because it can show you that one of the things that hopefully people see in this conversation is we are one team. We are all on the same side of this thing. We're all together. Your success is my success is your success. And that's what's helped me. I have multiple mentors. I have, and they range the gambit from a diversity perspective. And only a couple of years ago did it even occur to me that it was diversity that was helping me, because these have been my mentors for not just months, but decades that have helped me through my career. And I do the same. I want mentees that don't look like me solely, right? Some do, but some don't. And I think that's very, very important.
Guys, I feel like we just scratched the surface on this topic, but we're at the top of the hour and we're out of time. So you're more than welcome. We could schedule and we can continue. I just wrote a check today for $20-something thousand for media ops. We did something called Engineer the Change Scholarship, where we are sponsoring 5 people from disadvantaged communities, 3 of which are women, in getting with a local school here in Boca Raton called Boca Code. And they're getting a 10-week immersive software coding class where they're working on live projects. And I will tell you, one winner is a 55-year-old single mother who has no tech background, and she just wants to get into tech. Another one is a recent graduate with a neuroscience degree who couldn't get a job because of COVID, and was, I could cry almost saying this, she was washing a family's clothes for a living, doing laundry with a neuroscience degree. It's ridiculous. And so she's taking it. Who was the third? The third was an immigrant from Western Africa. Also, not a big tech background, but really passionate about the community. And 2 gentlemen who I think are going to be great engineers. But anyway, there are companies doing this. There are places right, where we're making inroads. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. Yeah, no, you know what? We made the local news. One of my wife's sisters called up and said, Alan's on the news. And, it was, and it wasn't really me on the news because I didn't want to be on the news. I made them interview the winners, but it's great. And City Furniture, which is a big company down here in South Florida, when they saw it, they joined in and doubled it. Yeah, and that is how it goes. And so we'll continue. Oh, Siri. Speaking of women voice assistants. Yeah, no, I don't even like to use it, to tell you the truth, but that's a whole nother story. Let's continue this conversation another time, though. Karen, Michelle, thank you so much for bringing your perspectives to today's call. Matt and Mitchell, as usual, you make it happen. Thank you. This is Alan Schimmel for CISO Talk. We'll be back in 2 more weeks with our next episode, and we hope until then you stay safe and well. Bye-bye.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the headlines for you. First up on DevOps.com is an article that looks at some DevOps trends to watch in 2021. It's hard to believe we are a full quarter of the way through the year, but there's still plenty of time to learn about some of the trends that are on the horizon and could make a presence over the next 8 or so months. This article offers up 5 that organizations need to consider, and most of them aren't about technologies or tools, but rather people and ways of working. It's a different take on the usual trend story and offers some insight that might be helpful as organizations embrace or move deeper into DevOps. It's an interesting read, too. And we have an article that explores how the DevOps skill journey fosters a learning culture. Human skills, among others, have always been important, now more than ever. Thanks to the pandemic and the increase in remote work, empathy, diversity, creativity, and personal commitment have been put to the test. Needless to say, we've been challenged over the last year. And that's being borne out in the recently released Upskilling 2021 Enterprise DevOps Skills Report. 69% of respondents consider human skills a must-have or a very important skill for the DevOps humans. Yet only 39% of respondents reported they have a formal upskilling program. It's widely recognized that to continue thriving within DevOps or to initiate a DevOps journey, individuals, leaders, and organizations should take action in developing skills across these areas. So why the disconnect? This article takes a deep dive into the human aspects of DevOps and the skills necessary to not just survive, but thrive. It also takes a look at the skill journey toward becoming a learning organization. This is a very insightful article, chock full of useful information for any organization looking to up its DevOps game, not only in technology, but also in people and process. All right, over on Container Journal, Mark Hornbeek offers up a Containers Practices Gap Assessment. This is a great way to effectively evaluate an organization's practices for containers and determine a strategy for improvement. Gap analyses provide valuable inputs for formulating a strategy and roadmap to improve a topic, and containers is certainly no exception. There are 7 steps in Mark's 9 Pillars Gap Assessment tool designed to provide a comprehensive analysis of how an organization is currently using containers and how it can improve its practices regarding them. In this article, Mark walks us through each step and offers some useful commentary on how a gap assessment tool can benefit organizations. In short, a gap assessment tool can help identify gaps and guide organizations on how to close them. And that is never a bad thing. And we have an article that looks at a maturity model for cloud-native databases. Companies have been leveraging Kubernetes and other technologies to move workloads to the clouds, but there have been some challenges. What to do with the data layer, what technologies should they use, where should the organization keep data, and how should they move it? At the center of these questions is the database. Many of the databases that support our applications have been around for a long time, well before the notion of cloud native took hold. What then does a modern cloud native data architecture really look like? This article takes a look at the maturity model for cloud native databases to assess data layer technology as part of an overall cloud architecture and to ensure that a consistent level of maturity is applied across the stack. And over on Security Boulevard, we have an article that looks at the 3 keys to defending Active Directory. While perimeter defenses such as firewalls and antivirus software remain essential elements of a comprehensive network defense strategy, stopping 100% of attacks at the perimeter is impossible, thanks to an ever-evolving attack surface. Eventually, an attacker will successfully breach those defenses, establish a beachhead within the network, and move laterally to escalate their privileges, identify valuable assets, and then disrupt network operations. And one of their main areas of disruption is Microsoft Active Directory. Compromising Active Directory can hand attackers the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, so it needs to be secured and well. Fortunately, organizations can dramatically increase the security of Active Directory by improving security in 3 key areas. This article looks at what those 3 areas are and offers some tips for securing Active Directory fully. Finally, we take a look at the recent Microsoft Exchange Server and SolarWinds attack with an article that suggests companies need to rethink their security strategy. It's not so much about the tools, but the approach many organizations take with cybersecurity. Microsoft Exchange is such a high-value target because it has almost 80% enterprise market share, and as such holds the biggest secrets of our times. Yet, with this most recent breach, nobody knows where those secrets went. This article analyzes the vulnerabilities in Exchange Server that hackers were able to exploit and notes that some of them can be mitigated with proper reviews, penetration tests, and tools such as web application firewalls. Others, not so much. That's why a different approach to security is needed, one that utilizes both behavior analysis and cryptographic authentication. Perhaps if Exchange Server had this kind of protection, the intrusion attempt would have been identified and stopped before it caused any damage. Now, however, we may never know. All right, that's it for the headlines for today. Please check back with me tomorrow when I will have a fresh new batch for you. Until then, have a great day. Please stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here now with Tanisha Martin, who is the Executive Director of a group called Black Girls Hack. Tanisha, thank you so much for taking a couple of minutes and talking with me today. Really do appreciate it.
I appreciate you guys for having me.
All right, great. So let's talk about Black Girls Hack. I found out about it from Gordon Lawson over at Rangeforce, and he was telling me that his organization is very much involved in it. And I'm really, really fascinated by what you guys have going on and how you guys are helping serve underrepresented communities, especially in IT and cybersecurity. So can you tell me how you guys got started and what your goals are with Black Girls Hack?
Absolutely. So we actually got started maybe in 2019. We started as an Instagram page, and it was just to share information as far as training resources for people to get hands-on skills in ethical hacking. So, once I started interacting with people, on social media, I noticed that a lot of them did not have hands-on training skills. A lot of them needed to study for certifications, weren't finding the motivation, just didn't have, a tribe of people to be able to, work together with. So, we have got together. We've ramped up since September when we filed our nonprofit paperwork to try to bridge some of those gaps. So, we noticed, for example, that there are financial barriers. So we're providing discounts for the vouchers for certification. So we work with companies such as EC Council and CompTIA to provide those certifications for the squad. Additionally, we have study groups for those certifications to help people to get ready for those exams. And we also focus on a lot of the soft skills. So, for example, resume review, mock interviews, mentoring, so that we can, as much as possible, provide them with hands-on skills. So I want to say maybe 6 days a week, we do some sort of training, whether that's hands-on ethical hacking skills. We do a Friday night labs. We do intro to capture the flag, as well as our various workshops and study groups. And we also have things that are meant to increase representation within the community, so that, Black women can see other Black women who are doing things in cybersecurity. And we also have a Bring a Hacker to Work days on Sundays, which is basically, it's basically a way for us to show people what an actual job looks like, right? When we talk about cyber, it's such a huge thing, and there's so many different areas that you can work on, right? So our partnership, for example, with Rangeforce, they actually, give us training in a lot of those different areas. But as far as what you're going to do on a day-to-day, we use the Bring a Hacker to Work days to provide an example of, what does it mean if you're a cybersecurity engineer? What does it mean if you're a penetration tester? What are you doing day-to-day? Just so people can have an idea of what it is that they're getting themselves into. So our goals are basically just to increase diversity in cybersecurity, and also within the executive suites. If you don't see,
so cool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we don't see a lot of, specifically Black women in cybersecurity. I think when you just look at the female population, it's something like maybe 20%. So, when we segment that down to Black women, it's much less. And especially if we're looking at the executive suites, if you look at the CISOs and the CEOs, for example, you don't see a lot of Black women in those spaces. So, we're trying to, prepare the next generation of cybersecurity professionals to be able to, get into the workforce and thrive and succeed.
That's great. That is so cool. And the fact that you guys actually started out as kind of a social media effort and kind of exploded from there, I think that's really, really great. Did you actually kind of set out to focus on Black women in the hacking community or in cybersecurity, or was it more of a kind of a general maybe just targeting minorities in general or underserved communities in general? How did you guys kind of, focus on, come to focus on, and come up with your name?
So it was really just based off of, me trying to get 100% into cybersecurity. When I was looking into the field, just for people who were operating in the ethical hacking and penetration testing space, I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me, right? So when I created the Instagram page and all of the various social medias, it was really just to put visibility out that, Black women were actually operating in the space, that Black women actually did hack. So that was the motivation behind it. But, as we started, operating, as we started putting out resources as far as cheaper training courses or free training courses or books or just ways for you to get hands-on skills. I think one of the first things that we were doing is setting up home labs for ethical hacking exercises so that you could practice, within your own virtualization environment, those ethical hacking skills, and it's not costing you any money. So, just based off of that, I saw that there were a lot of people who were interested, so, we decided, hey, we're going to turn this into a nonprofit. I actually received an email from someone saying, hey, you guys can apply for this grant. I think the work that you're doing is amazing. So, at the time we hadn't filed our nonprofit paperwork, and we definitely didn't have our 501c3 at that point. But, I said, I'd been thinking about turning it into a nonprofit just based off of the sheer amount of people who were interested, and then, like I said, we as a Black woman, I wanted to focus on our interests. But then as I started, I realized that there were a lot of, other people. Some of them were women, some of them were non-binary, some of them were men, who had the same, barriers to entry. They wanted hands-on skills. They wanted, a support group as far as like studying and accountability. So, we have since then, we've developed, for example, swag that is for Black Men Hack, or, we have a kids program, which is Black Kids Hack. And cool. We're going to have some non-gender specific things coming up in the near future, which is just like my squad hacks, right? Because, maybe you don't necessarily, feel yourself represented by the Black Girls Hack branding. So we're trying to make sure that our environment is inclusive But at the same time, our focus is trying to increase diversity. We want to focus on the interest of, Black women, but, we're not discriminating in any way. Everyone is welcome to come out and hack with us. And we want to, take over the world together. We literally welcome anyone who wants to come out with us and do, hacking. So, I think it's a great community.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So before this, were you working in the cybersecurity space? Were you doing ethical hacking and kind of shifted into this, or were you just kind of interested in the field and thought it would be really kind of cool to have something going there?
Yeah, I've been in IT for the past 15 years. My background is in computer engineering. And then I have master's degrees in cybersecurity and digital forensics. So, I have been over the past few years, just increasing my cybersecurity knowledge. I literally just did my first capture the flag event last year. So, I am not like, an elite hacker. Like I tell people I'm probably like medium level, hacking and penetration testing knowledge, but, I'm making sure that I'm learning every day. I'm working every day towards it. And I'm teaching the people who, are just starting in the industry. I'm teaching them what I know, right? The little that I know, I try to teach them so that, they can at least get to where I'm at and then be able to, build upon those skills and move further.
That's great. I love that. And I think it's, so very important to kind of keep learning all the time, just beyond what you're doing and just learning along with your squad, so to speak. So I think that's really great. Now, you guys are working with a number of, or at least a few organizations right now to kind of help kind of promote the Black Girls Hack, branding and mission. Who are some, what are some of the companies that you currently work with? I know we mentioned Rangeforce because that's actually how I found out about you guys, but who else are you guys working with these days?
So most of the other folks that we've partnered with are other like-minded nonprofits whose missions align with what it is we're trying to do. We've partnered recently with Minorities in Cybersecurity, which is an organization that's focused on increasing diversity in cybersecurity. We've partnered with women in women in security and cybersecurity. And then, I consider Women Cyberjitsu, my unofficial mentoring. I think we're going to try to partner with them soon because I absolutely love the work that they're trying to do. But we are just trying to find organizations that are like us, trying to operate in the space and trying to increase diversity. We also partner with Blacks in Cybersecurity as well. We actually just competed in their winter conference this past couple of months, and our Black Girls Hack team placed second. So we're really excited about that for their Capture the Flag competition. But we are trying to partner with, literally anyone who, can help us to achieve our mission. We want to provide training to the squad. We want to provide certifications. We want to try to reduce some of the financial barriers. So, any organizations that want to follow Rangeforce's lead to try to help us out, we would definitely welcome that because, I want to make sure that the next generation of cybersecurity professionals, that they are both diverse as well as, well prepared.
Yeah, and considering the fact that there is such a dearth of cybersecurity professionals these days, the market is ripe for expansion of the market in general, and it's a great thing that I think you guys are doing to help promote that. And diversity and inclusiveness is becoming a much larger part of the conversation these days as we look to expand the workforce. And I think anything that can help expand the what is considered the stereotypical cybersecurity professional, I think is a good thing for the industry as a whole. Are you guys working with any schools to because you did mention that you do have the Black Kids Hack? Are you working on any programs to work with the schools to kind of bring up that next generation of cybersecurity professionals?
Absolutely. So we are actually trying to roll out our Black Kids Hack program this summer. We're in the process of developing the curriculum now. So we're going to try to roll that out to DC public schools. We're working with a high school in DC just because that's I'm a product of DC Public Schools myself. So, I wanted to, try to roll out there just to give them the opportunity because, I attribute, my early exposure to things like robotics and computer science towards, me being able to get to where I'm at today. So, I want to provide them with the same type of opportunities, but my hope is that, we can roll it out, nationwide to a lot of other school districts, because I feel like, in order for us to really see lasting change in cybersecurity, we've got to hit the K through 12 population. We've got to provide exposure earlier on so that people realize that this is a career, because most people start working towards, what do they want to be when they grow up at like maybe 2 and 3 years old, right? Kids want to be whatever it is that they want to be. And we just want to let them know that, one of those options is, in cybersecurity, that they can be, ethical hackers, that there's not a, negative connotation associated with it, that we're helping to secure, all of our families and all of our homes and all of our businesses, right? So, I want to provide that exposure as much as possible. So, anyone who's watching and you're an administrator for a school district and you want to bring us in, please feel free to reach out, because we want to, have a lasting change moving forward.
I think that's great. So on that note, if anyone does want to reach out, how can they get more information about Black Girls Hack?
So we are online at blackgirlshack.org. We are also on social media, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at Black Girls Hack. And we have Meetup as well, where you can sign up for most of our workshops and hands-on training classes. And we also have a Slack. So we are pretty much everywhere as Black Girls Hack. And we welcome everyone. So, even if you're not a Black girl, you're welcome to come out and hack with us and, take over the world with us.
That's awesome. All right. Well, Tanisha, thank you so much for walking me through it. I think what you guys are doing is phenomenal, and I fully support you in your efforts. Anything you need from me, you just call me and I'll help you out. In fact, I have a couple ideas for you, which I'll talk to you about offline. But for now, yeah. So, but for now, thank you again for coming on TechStrong TV and talking with me about Black Girls Hack. I think it's, like I said, I think it's a great organization. All right, everybody, we've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so please stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community, digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Kai Rohr, who I know I've mispronounced your name, but he is the Managing Director of Research at KnowBe4. Kai, thank you so much for taking the time and joining me today. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Charlene. It's a great pleasure.
Great. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the 2021 Security Culture Report that your organization just published. And it sounds like a fascinating report on a number of levels. How did you guys kind of come up with the idea of measuring security culture, and what exactly does that mean?
So that's a very long answer for that one. It took me 15 years of my career to get to that point. Okay. I'll try to keep it short. So roughly 10 years ago, I created something called the Security Culture Framework, which the aim of this was to help organizations around the world figure out how to actually change behavior and improve the security of their employees. Okay. And one of the steps in the framework is to measure security culture. And based on that, I received a number of requests from all over the world. So Kai, how do you measure security culture? And that's how we started to measure security culture. We created a scientific methodology. And between 2015, when we started with the measurement system, and now we have measured almost 500,000 employees worldwide, which gives us, some data to tell us or tell everybody actually about security culture.
Well, that's great. That's great. So, I mean, it's such a different way of approaching security from that, that knowledge standpoint. So you've been doing it since about 2015. What are some of the trends that you've kind of seen over the last few years and obviously, the pandemic notwithstanding, I know that probably had some impact on the latest findings, which we'll dive into, but really kind of interested in learning first, what's kind of changed since you guys started the report, either, in that hockey stick effect or kind of a gradual change in security culture?
So I'd say there are two things that has changed in that period. The first one is that now we have a scientific, valid and reliable tool to measure security culture. And that for the industry as a whole is a crucial step forward. It is now possible to do it in a way that means that you can measure the same organization multiple times and see how it changes over time, which basically tells you how your awareness work and programs are actually influencing your organization. The other dramatic change we see now is that because we are able to collect all this data, we are also able to prepare what we call benchmarking data. Mm-hmm. Basically, any organization around the world now can just find their industry sector and then compare their own scores with that of their peers. And then basically the CEOs now know that, we are doing a little bit worse than our competition. Maybe we need to step up the game a little bit.
Okay. All right. Great. So let's talk about the latest report then. What are some of the findings that are in this year's report? And then comparing that with years past, what are some of the things that really surprised you?
So the past year we've seen the pandemic, right? So all over the world we've seen COVID and change of workplaces and work from home and all these things. It has been noticed that in the technology sector, so for example, ransomware, phishing, those kind of things, it has changed a little bit, which we were then curious, how have this work from home kind of situation influence the security culture of organizations? So that's been a focus in this year's report, actually. Mm-hmm. And what I think is most surprising is that we don't actually see much change, with a few exceptions, which I'll get into in a moment. But I would have expected to see, for example, the bank and financial sector, who is already having a reasonably good security culture. But still, I would have expected to see it improve, because even they have done a lot of changes over the past 12 months. So that's one surprise. The other one, which is a very positive surprise, is at the bottom end of the benchmark, there is a cluster of organizations like education, energy sector, government sector, and generally they do poorly. Mm-hmm. But one of them stood out this year by improving by 3 points, actually, from their worst or previous score, and that is the educational sector. And I think that if you look at the changes for all of us over the past 12 months, most of us has been still using the same kind of tools, just changed environment. But if you look at the school systems and teachers and pupils, suddenly going from a classroom setting where the teachers are talking, and now they are in a setting where they have to forcefully adjust into digital reality. And so that's why I'm very happy to see this improvement. They are still not good, but it shows that it's actually possible to make huge change in very little time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great news as well. I can tell you as a parent, it's really great to see that school districts are really taking security a lot more seriously, online security, that is. And even with a lot of students going back to the classroom, they're still very much emphasizing technology and security, and they're incorporating a lot more technology into the classroom these days. They're having these integrated digital learning environments along with the in-person classroom instruction. So I think you guys may see, hopefully at least next year, maybe see the education sector improve even more. So that's exciting news. I'm very happy to hear that. Are there certain industries that maybe kind of fell down a little bit over the last year, since, especially in light of the pandemic and the fact that so many organizations did send their employees home to work remotely? Were there certain industries that kind of suffered because of that?
So one industry that comes to mind is the business services, and they dropped by a couple of points. They used to rank up in the top alongside bank and financial services and insurance, but now are actually doing worse. The challenge is that we don't actually know why. Which means that for my team, it's an opportunity to dig further and see if we can learn something. But of course, for that industry as a whole, it's not so good news, I'd say.
Right. So when you say business services, can you give me an example of what that industry is?
Yes, so those are typically all the support services, and usually you will see this as one part of a larger group of companies where they have like a service center or a business service center, those kind of things, which also makes it interesting in my opinion, because very often you will find these kind of business services corporations within, for example, bank and insurance and financial services. And then again, it begs the question, so why are you guys so different from those guys?
Right. So where do technology service providers fit into your survey, such as managed services providers or IT systems integrators, resellers, people who are in that particular category? Because I know they traditionally have focused a lot on obviously technology, but also security and ensuring that their customers are secure no matter where they are. And the managed services sector in particular over the last year has undergone some massive changes in light of the pandemic, and security has become a much larger part of the conversation. In fact, so many managed services providers have actually pivoted their business to become managed security services providers. So have you seen a change in that area with respect to the security culture and way that they're approaching security?
So in the sector we call technology in general, which is where we would put any kind of IT and managed services corporations, there are actually no changes since last year, which I guess is good, but it could also be that it's a bit too early. And also, this is a global survey, right? So the results we are looking at here is on a full global scale. And I'm not entirely, because I don't know the managed services industry particularly well myself. So I don't know how that is a US specific change the past few years. Usually you guys are a little bit earlier than the rest of the world, right? And then maybe in a couple of years' time, when the rest of the world catches up, we will see some changes.
Okay. All right, great. So looking ahead, I know you guys just came out with this report and you probably are already thinking about next year's report, but do you expect that as we kind of shift back, hopefully sooner rather than later, into a more stable working environment, whether it's a hybrid working environment, or if some people choose to go back to the office full time or even stay remote, but as that we achieve a level of stability there, do you expect that the whole security mindset is going to be changing? Do you expect it to improve or maybe perhaps fall back a little bit, or what are you guys expecting over the next year?
So, and this is my personal opinion, right? I believe that we will see change, and the change will be forced upon us. And the reason is basically because we have a few emerging trends, or trends that we've seen for some time now. One is this COVID technology adoption, meaning a lot of new people will use technology more or at a higher level than before. Combined with that, we see that the criminals around the world realize in a greater degree that there are no borders, online. So I don't need to actually be in your apartment to rob you. I can do that from a beach in, Florida or Thailand. And the third one is these criminals are using technology just like we do, right? Over the past years, we've seen how they have gone from testing the waters kind of thing into streamlining and building platforms that they actually sell some of these services as a service, right? So the criminals are looking at this as a business opportunity and are doing anything they can to maximize their benefits and seen the worst of it yet.
Unfortunately, I agree with you. I have seen it always amazes me how quickly hackers come up with new ways of capitalizing on what's happening in the world. And the pandemic was certainly no exception. And I think, if anything, they were able to kind of leapfrog over the past year, just the ways and the vectors and just the tenacity, for lack of a better word. They almost seemed relentless, and I expect that that's definitely going to be continuing. And I certainly hope we one day get to hopefully a place where we they're not going to be two steps ahead of us. We'll probably always be one step ahead of us, but maybe not two. So
yeah, and I agree with you. And personally, I also hope that future still includes an open and sharing internet, because that is, I believe, one of the most important innovations of mankind.
That's a great point. And there have been a lot of discussions lately about whether to keep the internet open because of the security issues and everything that has gone on over the past year and beyond. So maybe that's another discussion for another time, Kai.
I'd love that.
All right, great. Well, thanks so much for sharing with me the security culture report for this year. I really do appreciate it. And let's get you back on another time. We'll talk about the free internet and maybe next year's security culture report as well.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Great. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Hey everybody, happy Thursday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the Thursday webinar previews for you. As always, we have so many great webinars coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. Here are 3 that are coming up very soon in the hopes that you will be able to mark your calendar and join us. The first one is called the Kubernetes Network Security Effect. This one is happening Monday, April 26th at 9 a.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard, and it is sponsored by Armos Security. Network policy is one of the most used security tools in any company's security stack, but while it is a great tool for making sure attackers stay outside the perimeter, it does not work in Kubernetes. So this webinar takes a look at the evolution of network policies, why they fail in Kubernetes, and how an organization can still define a network policy that keeps up with the rapid changes in a modern cloud-native infrastructure. Great one. Looking forward to that one. The second webinar I want to let you know about is called Application Security, Moving at the Speed of DevOps. This one is also happening Monday at April 26th. This one is at 1 p.m. Eastern, and it is also on Security Boulevard. This one is a panel discussion moderated by me and featuring Reese Arkins of WhiteSource, Eitan Worsel of HCL Software, and Scott Gerlach of StackHawk. And we discuss all things application security. The need to shift security left in the application development lifecycle is growing critical as application security testing can't keep pace with the speed and velocity of application development. So in this webinar, we'll explore some of the ways that application security is evolving from a point-in-time process in production to an early and continuous step in the DevOps toolchain. I am super excited about this webinar, really looking forward to this conversation. These are some very, very smart people who know their stuff, so I'm really, really excited to be doing this webinar with them. All right, the third and final webinar I want to let you know about is called How Instacart Uses Datadog and AWS CloudWatch for Real-Time Monitoring. This one is happening Tuesday, April 27th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It is sponsored by Datadog. Visibility into the performance of applications and their underlying cloud infrastructure is super important in these days of digital transformation and customer experience. So to provide customers with lower latency access to their critical monitoring data, AWS recently released CloudWatch metric streams, which is a new capability that continuously pushes metrics to other AWS services and third-party monitoring platforms, such as Datadog. So this webinar will offer up such information as what CloudWatch metric streams enables and why AWS developed it, how Datadog integrates with CloudWatch metric streams and other AWS services to provide comprehensive real-time visibility into an AWS environment, and how Instacart is using Datadog and AWS CloudWatch to monitor its grocery delivery service during a period of unprecedented demand. In other words, the pandemic. All right, that is it for the webinar's preview for Thursday. I will be back on Monday with a brand new batch for you. Until then, I hope you have a great day, have a great weekend. Whatever you do, please stay safe. All right, next up, we have Mitch Ashley speaking with Blair Lyon, who is the VP of Cloud Experience at Linode. He talks, the two of them talk about a research report that Accelerated Strategies Group recently did on alternative cloud providers, cloud infrastructure providers, and their increasing roles as alternatives to or additive options to the large cloud providers, such as AWS, Google, and Azure. It's a great conversation. Really dives into some of the findings of the report, really does shed some light on the alternative cloud provider sector as a whole. Great conversation. Let's get right to it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Well, the pleasure being joined by Blair Lyon, who is VP Cloud Experience with Linode. Welcome, Blair.
Thanks for having me, Mitch. Really great to be here.
Good to be talking with you. So we're going to get into a research report that Accelerated Strategies just released. But before we do that, I'd love to have you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about Linode.
Sure. As you mentioned, Mitch, my name is Blair Lyon. I run our cloud experience team here at Linode. And for those that don't know who Linode is or haven't heard about us, we've actually been around since 2003. 18 years now. So we were actually one of the pioneers in the cloud computing space, actually launched 3 years prior to even AWS launching their public cloud offering. And Linode has really taken kind of a different stance than some of the big cloud providers. We focus really on the developer. And when we say developer, we're talking individuals, small teams, hobbyists, startups that are looking for something else. They kind of push against the complexity of the large enterprise cloud providers and have looked for simplicity and more affordable pricing, and typically better, more human, direct services and support. And those are the kinds of things that Linode is able to provide. And Linode has been part of this kind of emerging category, although we've been around for 18 years, really only recently, I would say in the last couple of years, with other companies like DigitalOcean or OVH or Hetzner and others like us, have we sort of started to build out this category that analysts like yourselves and others are calling the alternative cloud category. And when we say alternative, we're talking about really alternatives to the hyperscalers, to the Googles and the AWS and Azures. And alternative meaning that companies like Linode can be a viable alternative for most workloads. So we have the compute power, we have the global network, we have the sophisticated APIs to be able to allow people to manage their workloads that they would normally do on an AWS, but be able to do that very easily and predictably on a cloud provider like Linode. So that's really what we're all about. And I know today we're going to talk a little bit more about how that category plays into kind of this emerging group of folks called DevOps that are managing cloud infrastructure and working with providers like ourselves.
Excellent. Yeah, we just so everyone knows that we just launched a report that was sponsored, commissioned by, it was independent research, but was commissioned by Linode, focused on DevOps and the alternative cloud. And just kind of full disclosure, I was actually, or my team was as a customer of Linode going back to probably 2012 or 13, about 10 years after you started. I started working using AWS in 2008 or 9. So, I've kind of worked in a little bit of both spaces. And by the way, it was the developer that brought Linode in, very much to what you're saying. So you talked about the emergence of this category and the research that we did. And I encourage everyone to, we'll provide a link to go to Accelerated Strategies to download this report. It's free. It was really interesting. We looked at several things. One of them was, are we in this single cloud world? How many people are multi-cloud? Are folks kind of where they need to be, especially after we've gone through the last 12 plus months with acceleration of digital transformation projects and all of that? Okay, so has everybody gotten what they need? Did they take care of it in the last 12 months? And interestingly, no. There were a number of folks who said, matter of fact, we're looking at about 7% growth between 21 and 22 in terms of usage of cloud services. And that we had a number of organizations, a larger number of responses. They were looking to add some additional level of cloud infrastructure from another provider within this year. So it was like over half that were saying it. So it very much is a growing. You described it as kind of emerging. Maybe it is from an analyst standpoint. You've been doing this for a while. So what's your experience been? Does it back up that research that we're finding?
Well, I mean, as a lot of people have talked about, and we've seen in our market, I mean, we've had tremendous acceleration and cloud adoption over the last 13, 14 months, primarily driven from COVID and a lot of people needing to move online faster and scale faster than maybe they had initially forecasted. But along with that has been sort of this combining, I guess, trends in the marketplace. And you mentioned multi-cloud before. And multi-cloud can be defined in a lot of different ways, but when it comes to how do I have not only more redundancy and reliability, but also how can I not put all my eggs in one basket? I think most of us in the technology space have had those experiences, whether in the cloud space or in other technology aspects of our business, where we have been kind of locked in with one vendor and found out that always kind of ends badly. And so one of the things that now we've sort of reached this commoditization or parity among services with the cloud providers. The technology that Linode uses, the AMD and the Intel processors and the NVMe drives and so on, and that we use are the same, if not better, than what you'll find on an AWS or a Google Cloud platform. And the global network that we have, has now the reach to be able to provide services, low latency services anywhere in the world. So now you've sort of reached this sort of tipping point where you don't have to just go with a hyperscaler or just go with AWS, was kind of the thing that people had talked about just a few years back. But you really do have alternatives. You have choices, and you can sort of pick and choose the provider that makes the most sense for you. So multi-cloud has sort of helped open the door for that. The realization that the commoditization of these products is relatively similar. The fact that providers like Linode and others are kind of checking those boxes on those remaining sort of things that people need to be a true alternative. And then, of course, this dramatic push that's happened due to the pandemic and the acceleration of a lot of global infrastructure transformation projects has really kind of helped establish, I think, this alternative cloud category in an amazing way, especially over the last year.
It's interesting too, and I'm not going to make our conversation just about the report. Folks can go download that. But one of the things we looked at is, what do people see the benefits that they expect? What's the drivers for DevOps teams, right? We're talking about not just developers, but sort of the spectrum of people involved in creating software. It is interesting, but to me, time to market was a huge factor. Matter of fact, the QA response from QA people, over 80% of people responded that is a huge factor for them. But it's also, DevOps, CI/CD people, engineers, software developers were, like over 60%. They're very sensitive to this time to market issue. And so you talked about the ability to work with Linode, being easy to work with, along with the cost effectiveness and sort of equity and capabilities, sort of fits right into some of the drivers and super important factors to DevOps teams.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that I think there's been sort of this realization that I don't need a lot of the complexity, especially if you're a small to mid-sized business. Do I need all of that complexity? Which sometimes you do. Sometimes you need the hundreds of products and services that an AWS will have. Sometimes you need to do completely custom implementations. But for most of us, especially with the modernization of some of the tooling, like Terraform and others that are between our applications and infrastructure, it makes it much, much easier to manage. And so what they're looking to do, and what we're seeing from a lot of our DevOps customers, is that they're saying, I really appreciate the simplicity now. I don't need to have all of all of that customization. I can appreciate more direct, simple access to my infrastructure, and they can really get a lot of the benefits of these alternative cloud providers like us, which are typically, you get a lot of things packaged, like you get free transfer, large amounts of free transfer, you get storage. You get other things already bundled in, like free DDoS protection, you get free firewall, you get a lot of things that normally are a la carte with the large cloud providers are just included. So we're trying to put really the easy button on a lot of things around public cloud, and doing that in a way that's also much less expensive. Typically, we're about a third of the pricing of the bigger guys. And so those combinations and those trends that we kind of talked about are kind of converging right now to make alternatives, when and where appropriate, a viable option to look at.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the complexity. It's also sort of opposed to what you were mentioning before about vendor lock-in. That can be a difficulty in a multi-cloud environment if you're heavily connected into services from AWS, Azure, or Google. Now, okay, I want the same capabilities, but they're not the same, right? Even if it's based on open source, doesn't mean that the way you work with those services from a cloud provider is the same. And what I've seen from Linode is you talked about removing the complexity and more of the easy button. It's really the core things you need to get into the cloud to bring your apps up to either lift and shift or create something new. You can do kind of both ends of the spectrum. without having to unhook yourself from those types of services that a big cloud provider might lock you into.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we, from our professional services team, as well as a lot of our managed service provider partners that we work with, is what they're recommending customers do where it's appropriate. Not there's no one size fits all, but where appropriate is to try and look for a configuration that's going to really kind of disconnect to a certain degree the cloud primitives that you would use from a provider like a Linode or an AWS. Layer in, whether it's open source or other kind of third-party tooling in between the cloud provider and then you and your application, then you kind of have the best of all worlds. You have the ability to sort of plug and play those cloud primitives from those different providers. You have more flexibility to do a multi-cloud configuration. Let's say you do run into a situation where you want to change providers, you can do so easier. A lot of clients worry about, is Amazon now going to compete in my business, or are they going to potentially take advantage of my open source application? There's all these sort of fears around how much I can really trust these large providers who have lots of other businesses, lots of other ulterior motives. You had the thing with Google where, hey, are they even going to support public cloud in the future if it doesn't make enough margin to give them a shareholder return? So there's lots of fears that we have when we're dealing with big technology companies. And so it's nice to be able to architect your environment. And you can do that now easier, where you can sort of disconnect to a certain degree some of that sort of proprietary sort of connectivity that most of us have typically had to do with cloud providers. You can kind of have the best of both worlds, where you're more in control and the cloud providers are more commoditized. And for Linode, we really feel that that's the ideal. That really is the best of all worlds.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the developer is a target audience or a big audience for you, as was the case in my experience. It's interesting. Some of the data from our research showed that, but also showed that multiple parts of the organization are now involved in that. Maybe it's not the initial push, maybe it's the final selection or approval, whether it goes up to senior management or it's involved in some kind of a infrastructure group operations. There's a lot of folks involved in the DevOps process, and I think they also have a hand in the underlying infrastructure, the cloud provider, and want to be part of that decision. Is that consistent with your experience?
I mean, that was an interesting point, because depending on who you talk to, and I think some of it might depend on what type of company, how big the company is I think there was this prevailing feeling that the developers really were sort of like the kingmakers. They were the ones that were deciding on which cloud provider to use. And I think from your research, you kind of showed some contrast there. You're saying, yes, developers are still a very important, and in many cases are making the decisions. But especially as the organizations increase in size, you're getting CIOs and IT leaders, procurement, people like that are in there making those decisions. And I think that makes sense. The larger your cloud spend, I'm assuming it's going to get bumped up in your organization to negotiate pricing and things like that. But the smaller your organization, more on the SMB side, I think developers are still sort of the kings there, and they're dictating when and where, what solutions they want to interface with. So it's a little bit surprising, but also sort of validating in a way. But it does feel like a little bit more of a shift away from, I think, developers having more of the control. And maybe it's because the cloud is becoming more simpler, and people are getting it. And maybe leadership isn't as afraid of it and kind of understands how to buy and contract with cloud vendors. And it's not so much of a mystery as maybe it was in the past.
I think also, times have changed. We're used to buying cloud services. It was never sort of, we're going to do what? We're going to move to the cloud.
Yeah, what is that? I don't know about cloud services before. Yeah.
Use more. I think there's maybe a parallel with software and open source, because that's also a big entree for technology coming through into the organization with developers. And while it might start that way, it often ends up with, well, ultimately, if we're going to base everything on this or this much, this part of our business, that elevates the visibility of those decisions, whether it's management or operations or finance or whatever. That also happens in the software world. So I'm not surprised in some ways to see this.
I guess that makes a lot of sense.
A huge role, right?
Yeah, I guess it makes a lot of sense now that you saw in your research how much more important cloud is becoming, for these businesses, and they've probably seen also if I need to be, able to scale, especially with these unexpected events happening in our world, I need to be able to do that in areas where there is, where there's resources. That's one of the things that we found over this last 12 months is people that had on-prem infrastructure couldn't scale it because they just simply couldn't get the parts. The supply chain broke down and there was no capacity to be able to grow. And so they had to move faster to public cloud infrastructure where we, of course, had to have the capacity to help them grow.
Well, we may have that issue even more so now with the short supply of chips and what that's doing in this consumer space. We may have that with the infrastructure that's on-prem, so even makes it more advantageous to be in the cloud. What was also interesting is you talked about how long Linode's been in business and serving your customers, and kind of the emergence of this as a category in the analyst world. In our research, we asked people what services are you providing? You talk about the hyperscalers of Azure and Google and AWS, and even looking at Oracle and IBM as kind of legacy or heritage providers. The category for alternative was kind of right there, next to the top three, the hyperscalers. So as a group, it's a substantial part of the market of what people are using. So it's not a fringe activity by any stretch. Seems to be much more mainstream than maybe I might have expected.
Yeah, I mean that was super validating. I think we've known that that growth has happened, and that people, like we talked about with the growing trend of multi-cloud, the ease in which people can use multiple providers, using these sort of third-party tools and infrastructure as code and things like that, has really allowed them to be able to explore alternatives. And also us and others have now checked more boxes to get there. But it's fascinating that when you combine them together, that like you did in the research, is any one of us individually isn't that big compared to the super, super huge hyperscalers in the market. But when you combine us together, especially for this audience, we're right there. Especially for small to mid-sized businesses, we're basically tied with Google Cloud for third place. So that's really exciting, I think, for our customers, for developers around the world that are looking for choice, freedom, control. They want to be able to have alternatives. They want to be able to kind of right size and fit their business with whatever the best vendor is for them, and they're demanding more. I mean, if you're a small to mid-sized business or even a large company that maybe isn't spending tens of millions of dollars on cloud, you're just not going to get the service or even a callback from many of these companies. And so to be able to work with providers, like us or Hetzner or DigitalOcean or OVH that put an emphasis and a priority on 100% human support, that are available to help you at any time, and that really simplify the pricing so everything's very predictable. You don't have any kind of gotchas that happen. And then we only do one thing. We only do public cloud infrastructure. So we're not competitive. We're not using your data in other ways that make your head scratch. We have our priorities 100% in line with delivering you the best possible cloud service possible, cloud infrastructure solution we can.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think your focus on developers is what's paid off, because at the same time, we used to say developers are king. Really, software is king now, and everybody involved in the software creation process. And our research in total has shown how software has been elevated at a strategic level in businesses. They need agility, they need reliability, they need ability to bet parts of the business on software being able to deliver, which this is part of that stack. So I think that focus on developers really has expanded into all parts of the software creation process, which is why they want a hand in what the infrastructure looks like, what the cloud provider looks like.
Well, that's one of the things I'm super excited about, right? Is our mission ever since 2003 has been, helping make cloud computing, more simple, more affordable, and more accessible to accelerate innovation, and not just for the rich and famous and powerful, but for the average developer, for anybody anywhere in the world. And we've really seen that grow over all these years. And if you think about it, I mean, now even way more so than even in the past, anybody, even an individual developer, can really change the world with the power that public cloud infrastructure gives them. And so these ideas and innovation, these things that can happen, can really kind of spring up from almost anywhere and from anybody. And so these developers that have a great idea, or even build it into a startup, is really where a lot of the innovation comes from today. And so it's exciting to kind of see that momentum build, and for Linode to play a bigger and bigger role in that.
Well, I hate to say we're running out of time here. We could keep going with this. It's a fun topic, and it's fun talking with you about it, Blair. Where can folks find out more about Linode and start using your products and services?
Sure. I mean, you can always go to linode.com, and you can sign up for a free trial. We typically offer $100 free credit, which for us, our lowest price compute instance is only $5 a month. So you can really be able to play around with our API and our CLI and our cloud manager, test out different configurations, fire up some one-click apps, and be able to try different things. So Linode's very, very easy to kind of take for a quick test drive. And if it's a good fit for you, we'd love to have you as part of our Linode family.
I think that'll speak well to DevOps teams, DevOps engineers, because they're looking for how to integrate the infrastructure into their tool pipeline. So things like the APIs are super important. Well, thanks, Blair. Blair Lyon, who is VP of Cloud Experience with Linode. In addition to going to Linode, you can download the DevOps and Alternative Cloud report from Accelerated Strategies at accelst.com. It's free. And so check it out. And we'd love to have you take a look at it. Thanks, Blair.
Thank you, Mitch.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, next up, we have Mike Vizard with The View with Vizard. He speaks with Guy Caspi, who is the CEO of a company called Deep Instinct. They're a cybersecurity company that is using deep learning algorithms to help transform cybersecurity. The company recently picked up $100 million in financing, or in funding, I should say, and they talk about what's happening in the sector, what the company plans to do with the money, and so much more. So it's a great conversation. Let's get right to it.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Guy Caspi, who's the CEO for Deep Instinct. They just picked up $100 million for a deep learning platform for cybersecurity. Guy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mikhail. Thank you for having me with you. Good morning.
I think people at this point are familiar with machine learning and how that gets applied to cybersecurity, but deep learning is a whole different other animal, right? So why don't you walk us through what it is you guys are doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. So I think the whole idea and the difference between machine learning and deep learning is how you process data and information, and the results of this are totally different. In machine learning, you need to do all the feature extraction and all the processes that everyone are well familiar, and some companies are already implementing this in cybersecurity. On the other hand, on deep learning, you skip this phase of feature extraction and you skip the phase of all the analysts and all the daily interactions with the malware and the cyber attack to understand exactly what was missing yesterday and today will come again. And the whole idea behind deep learning is the way we are working, we are imitating the way our brain is working, and actually the brain learns by itself what is anomaly, what is missing, what is important, what is something that can be an alert. And by that, allowing us to A, bring something very unique, which is prevention, B, address the cyber attack in a more, I would say, broad activity than others. We support many different operating systems from endpoint up to the cloud and network. And last point, we are doing the prevention in a very early stage of the attack. So you can treat us as the Pfizer of the world versus detection, which happens post-infection. You're already infected. You can do lots of activities, but even the terminology of the others, hunting, are claiming they can't prevent. They're going to hunt now while you're in the enterprise already. And this is the biggest difference between deep learning and machine learning, specifically in cybersecurity.
So there's a lot of things out there that you can track using a deep learning algorithm that kind of functions like the brain. It traces its history back to neural networks, as how I understand it. So as that comes together, how do you know what's a positive thing versus a negative?
So it's all about training. We are training neural network, as every neural network, running on GPUs. GPU allowing us to process information, a huge amount of data versus CPUs. We are the only cybersecurity that is running on GPU. And the training sets comprise of tens of very different data sets, which are going into a very important process in the company of labeling the data. What is malicious activity and what is not malicious activity. After 2 years, we don't need to do this process anymore. The brain knows how to learn by itself and recognize the patterns after he shows, like, I don't know, 5 billion or 6 billion samples. They know how to understand exactly what is benign and what is legitimate and what is a malicious activity. It's all about the secret sauce of how you train neural network, which is an IP by itself.
One of the banes of our cybersecurity existence is false positives. It leads to fatigue. It creates all these issues. So how will this approach kind of address false positives or eliminate them in a way that I don't burn out my cybersecurity staff?
It's a great question. I will start with the fact that Deep Instinct have the lowest false positive in the industry. In any independent test, I mean, the last one was SLab with all the other security vendors. The false positive in deep learning in any domain, it's close to zero. I wouldn't say it's zero, it's very close to zero. The reason for that is that when you take a malware and you have like 10K features you need to extract, and every day you need to repeat and get the new features which have been updated, and we are living in an era with 500,000 new malware every day, you create lots of false positives because everything is changing daily. With deep learning, we don't update, we don't sign signatures, we don't have heuristics, it just learns. And when it learns, it knows how to understand what is malicious activity in a very high probability. And it's a game between accuracy and efficacy to false positive. And in deep learning, the false positive usually in any domain, by the way, is very, very low.
We hear a lot about DevSecOps lately, and it's about the whole notion of pushing security responsibility to the left. But if I have AI, do I need to push it that far left, or is there a balance in the middle? Where do you think is going to be the relationship between developers and security people as we go forward?
I think it's a very interesting point. I will guess that probably it will be something in the middle. AI and deep learning will not take out the security people from organization. You always need people at the end of the day, and people are behind neural network, people are behind new features, people are behind addressing attacks in a different way in the value chain of the attack. So probably you will need still lots of people in the industry, but I think that the amount of analysts in this industry is going to slowly but gradually it will go down dramatically in a few years. The reason for that is that most of the work that machine learning and deep learning companies are doing in cybersecurity is process information in a very smart and fast way. And this is instead of people doing this until today in some cases.
How hard is it to set up Deep Instinct? I think a lot of people are intimidated by AI. So, do I need a rocket scientist to implement this thing on my side, or did you guys do all that?
No, it's very simple. I mean, the neural network and everything which related to the science part of the deep learning is been done in the lab, nothing to the customer. The customer is getting like a very small, tiny, lightweight agent that is going to be installed on any OS you run as an enterprise. Doesn't matter if it's Windows, Android, iOS, or macOS, or you can have an agentless solution. It's very smooth, very fast. In less than a few hours, you can be protected.
Do you guys think that the bad guys are starting to use AI, and is this starting to turn into something of a cybersecurity arms race?
Yes, we see evolution of AI in cyber attack, primarily in nation state cyber attack, which is most of the successful campaigns in the last 2 years. We don't see deep learning. We do see machine learning implementation in some of the attacks that have been generated in the last, I would say, 12 months. I think it will going to be, we'll see more machine learning implementation. I don't think we are going to see in the coming 5 years deep learning involved in cyber attack. The reason for that, first, the barrier of entry into deep learning is still very high for protection, so for sure for attack. Nonetheless, this will impact dramatically the companies which are implementing machine learning. It's not a secret that in the SolarWinds attack, 5 Nasdaq-traded companies' code have been breached. Just 18 months ago, the code of silence BlackBerry was in the web. And the reason for that is that to reverse engineer machine learning features and capabilities, relatively easy. I've been on the other side for many years. To understand what exactly neural network is doing and what is the specific criteria and how the brain took the decision on something specific, I wouldn't say it's not possible, but I would say it's almost mission impossible. There are some decisions which the brain is doing, which I'm not, I cannot understand myself sometimes.
So the bad guys are using evasive techniques essentially, and you're saying that they can apply that to machine learning algorithms, but it's a lot harder to do that against a defense built around deep learning algorithms that are much more like the human brain.
Right.
Okay. What is your best advice to people right now as they look at cybersecurity? I think there's a lot of frustration out there. People feel like they're investing in things and things aren't getting any better. So, is this a matter of, patience and wait it out? And will we ever solve this problem, or is it just going to always be there?
It's a great question. So I think when you're looking on the frustration, it's probably looking on CISOs and CIOs, of course, people and consumer, but I think the prime concerns of enterprise CIOs and CISO is A, they have too many products. B, all these products are creating huge amount of alerts and logs every minute, not every hour, every minute. And 3, with all the first 2, it's creating huge amount of mismatch between what is real attack and what is something that not that important. And this is something which is creating lots of frustration on many IT organizations, and the fact that until today, you have in an average between 5,000 plus malware, which are getting into corporate in North America daily, with all the systems and with all what they bought, because the focus of this industry, because it couldn't prevent, was all about detection. Doesn't matter if it's in the network, endpoint, or in the perimeter. The reason for that was that companies couldn't have the technology to prevent. And it's very different from detection. And now my recommendation, and of course, this is something that everyone is going to do, I think, in the coming few years. It's getting more and more prevention capabilities. Doesn't matter from whom. You look on the market today and you see that companies are investing and invest in the last, and will continue to invest millions of dollars, and still they have daily breaches. So the reason for that is that the fact they don't have the right system to prevent. Most of the market is doing a great job in detection, in remediation, in hunting, but this all happening after you're already in crisis. We are playing a game which is starting very early and before something is going to hit you. And this is all what I see in the market, and this would be my recommendation for everyone which is dealing with complex cyber attack and they are looking on a threat landscape which is evolving dramatically. And let's not forget that if you are a corporate in North America, Global 2000 or Fortune 500, your threats are not cyber group anymore. Your threats are countries. There was a single attack in December of SolarWind. In 1 hour, 18K companies have been breached. So it's not anymore about just, a specific niche play of this or that company, because, cybersecurity does a lot of problems and there's a lot of solutions for small problems. The number one problem should be addressed, and this is prevention. And it's not addressed well today in the industry.
One of the things we hear about all the time is that there's millions of these unfilled cybersecurity jobs. Do you think as AI advances that we're going to need all those jobs, or are we going to be able to fight the fight with the people we have today and we only need a small percentage more maybe?
I think that over time, we will need less people in cybersecurity, but not in the coming 2-3 years. In the coming 2-3 years, we still need this huge amount of people because many companies are creating products and tools. And let's not forget that cybersecurity was until, let's say, 2-3 years ago, it's been changing now, but until 2-3 years ago, it was a play of 6-7 companies that control the whole cybersecurity industry, 90% of the revenues. I'm speaking about all the big players. And these big players created products which tied huge amount of people to run the product. All the services and everything which related to services and what you provide with the product, it's something that was a very important part of the revenues, and B, something that they couldn't do it differently because the technology is so complex and most of the activities are about signatures and heuristics and hunting. So you need huge amount of people to operate this kind of system. So I think in the coming 2-3 years, it will still grow, but over time, probably not that far, 3 to 5 years from now, we will see that the AI implementation in different companies will take it down, I'm sure.
So do you think then that the total cost of security will come under control? Because one of the things that people are worried about today is that security keeps winding up being a bigger percentage of the overall IT spend, and none of that is money I'm spending on applications. It's just cost.
I think that because security will continue to be a very big spend in organization. I can tell you, and I've been on the other side for many years, the sophistication, the complexity, the techniques of cyber attacks in the last 2 years is something really amazing. I see technologies on the other side of the attack, sophistication and complexity, which I wouldn't imagine like 5 years ago that I would see in enterprise. It was more like, okay, between countries, sounds logic, not between enterprise. It's will not going to stop. It will get worse. And then you see that the budget will continue to be very high. Yes, ROI-wise, CIOs, CISOs will need to choose and spend wisely. Currently, they are spending in hysteric mode, many of them, and they are like buying many technologies. In many cases, they buy old brands because they think it's like, it's safer. But in the reality, we see what is happening. And the FBI report, the Cisco report, the Checkpoint report, the Palo Alto report, all the big players, we see the reports, we see the numbers, we see the numbers of independent organization like Maitre. It's just getting more and more complex.
Great. Hey, Guy, thanks for being on the show and sharing your insights.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting me.
All right, guys, back to you in the studio.
All right, that's it. That's a wrap for today's TechStrong TV broadcast. I hope everybody enjoyed today's broadcast as much as I do, as always. We will be back on Monday with a fresh new batch of interviews and insightful commentary, as we always do. And another quick reminder, today's Earth Day, so get out there and do. And then whatever you do, have a great weekend, I should say. And then whatever you do, please stay safe.